man, 21st century, doing something mean to it. Do it better than anybody you ever seen. Do it, scream from the haters, got a nice ring to it. I guess every superhero need his theme music. No one man should have all that power. The clock's ticking, I just count the hours. Stop tripping, I'm tripping off the power.
The American dream means, to me, equal rights and freedom.
Freedom.
Positivity and happiness.
It's what we're doing right here and now.
Having a family, having a successful career.
Being successful.
Just being happy. It's comfort, I guess.
What does the American dream mean to you?
Nothing.
The American dream. It's something that's almost been ingrained in us since birth. But as you can see, people have many different definitions of what it means. And nearly 60% of people say that they don't believe in the dream anymore. But what exactly is the American dream? The American dream is a dream of a land in which life could be better, richer, and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. It is not a dream of motor cars or high wages merely, but a dream of social order in which each man and each woman can live to their full potential. This is what James Adams wrote in 1931. But okay, that better, richer, fuller life, the motor cars, the high wages, how do you get those?
Step right up, folks. Here's the answer to your problems. Dr. Utopia's sensational new discovery, ism. Once you swallow the contents of this bottle, you'll have the bountiful benefit of higher wages, shorter hours, and security. Enormous profits, no strikes. Government control, no worry about votes. Name your own salary. Bigger crops, lower costs. Why, ism even makes the weather perfect every day. And now then, because we are introducing this amazing item for the first time in this country, it isn't going to cost you 1 cent. All you have to do is sign this little scrap of paper, and you get your bottle absolutely free.
I hereby turn over to ISM Incorporated everything I have, including my freedom and the freedom of my children and my children's children, in return for which said ISM promises to take care of me forever.
Okay, so the answer to your dreams lies in an ism. And the ism in this country is called capitalism. And it was invented by Adam Smith in 1776. And he described capitalism as production being from private entities. Goods and services are distributed according to the laws of supply and demand. And capitalism encourages competition and the distribution of labor in a free market. One of the other great isms of our lifetime is communism. And it was invented by Karl Marx. He described communism as in complete opposition to capitalism, where property is publicly owned, goods and services are distributed as needed, and in its ideal form, there would be no need for money, social order, or the state. But these two systems are pretty complex, even though we engage in them almost every day. So the word capitalism comes from the Latin root caput, which means head, and it was used as a measurement for cattle. So let's use an example of cows to break down these complex systems a little bit more simply. So in capitalism, you have 2 cows. You sell one, and you buy a bull. The economy grows because you herd multiples, and the economy grows because people want the milk. Eventually, you sell the cows and retire on the income. In communism, you have 2 cows. The state takes both and gives you some of the milk. So it's no wonder Americans chose capitalism. You know we love our cheeseburgers. Trust me, I'm from Wisconsin, I know. And so you've been sitting through a couple of these presentations, and you might be thinking you're a little bit hungry, and you might be thinking, I want to buy a cheeseburger. Well, you're in luck, because I am selling cheeseburgers. And because I sell these cheeseburgers, I own them, and I can do whatever I want with them. And I don't want to just give you my cheeseburger. I value your money, you value my cheeseburger, so we're in business. You are the demand, and I am the supply. So now you tell all your friends how great my cheeseburger is, and now I need to hire more people in order to sell more cheeseburgers. And I might hire people who are living to gain wages in order for them to buy more cheeseburgers. So this is the cycle of supply and demand. So let's go back to our exchange. Remember, you value a cheeseburger, and I value your money. So I want the highest price possible in exchange for my cheeseburger, and you want to pay the lowest price possible. This is because we're both working in our best self-interest. So you could go to my competition and get a cheaper burger, but remember, I value your money, so I need to create a better product or sell it at a lower price so that we can agree on an exchange. And this exchange, or equilibrium, when the supply meets the demand, is called the invisible hand. And the invisible hand is an unobservable market force that regulates the supply and demand of goods in a free market in order to reach equilibrium automatically. So this means that prices adjust themselves, that there's no need for extra regulation. But what happens is this equilibrium can sometimes take a long time. And in the process, people get really frustrated. So what happens is the government usually takes things into their more visible hands instead. But capitalism in its ideal form works. And the competition within capitalism has inspired some of the greatest innovations in human history, like the competition that drove innovation to drive us to new frontiers and put a man on the moon. But lately, people have been saying otherwise, and they blame capitalism for hijacking the American dream. And lots of people have been agreeing with them. So, did capitalism kill the American dream? In order for us to answer this question, let's go back to the turn of the century when industrialization and the distribution of goods were just hitting their stride.
Episode 1. It was the turn of the century. The Industrial Revolution brought prosperity and a good life. People were drinking, dancing, and having a great time. Everything was new, and there was new desires that were being manufactured. Mass production was happening in factories, and there was a material abundance that people never seen before. Ford Motor Cars was producing a Ford Model T every 25 seconds. The automobile industry brought efficiency and personal freedom that people never had before. And with that personal freedom, they now had the weekends. People were earning wages and salaries, and it was the beginning of the 5-day work week. Businesses were implementing the 5-day work week because they figured one less day that people were working, it meant one more day that they were spending money and buying things. But then everything changed. It was October 29th, 1929. Black Tuesday hit Wall Street. The stock market went down 40%. Everything went to a halt. For the next decade, Americans and the citizens went into a downward spiral. Things were bleak, and people were left in a low psychological state. How did this happen? There were warning signs that people didn't take heed to. Just years before the crash, farmers, they lost big in the agricultural industry. And with the invention of tractors, they got greedy and they wanted to produce more crops. And with an overproduction of wheat and barley and cotton, there was an overproduction, prices dropped, and the farmers lost big. But it didn't just stop there. The greediness was also in the factories. There was unsafe places that people were working. Even children as young as 8 years old were working in these unsafe and poor conditions. But no one really took notice, and they just wanted to continue to make a lot of products and materials at a faster rate, and it didn't matter how they got there. And even advertising became aggressive. President Herbert Hoover spoke to people and said, "Advertisers have transformed people into constantly moving happiness machines, machines which have become the key to economic progress." So material goods were sold to people as symbols of personal freedom. After World War II, people came home and they were seeking stability. They were afraid that there was going to be another crash. So with that, there was a new dream. And this new dream was sold to them. It was the American dream. It included a house, a car, and a white picket fence. They thought that this American life and a material abundance was their American right. And the material abundance continued into owning a second home. Leisure-Rama was a community built in the early 1960s in Montauk, Long Island. And they were completely outfitted with appliances and furniture, even down to the toothbrush. People didn't have to do anything. They just walked right in and everything was perfect for them. These homes were sold for $16,000 at the time. And today, one of these homes would go for $700,000. So we can see that people listened to the tale that if they worked hard, they would get closer to the dream. But with the economic crash, everything went into a downward spiral. And they didn't listen to any of the warnings. And instead, they bought a second home and a second car.
Like so many people these days, we live in the suburbs, and Dave needs the car every day for business. When he was gone, I was practically a prisoner in my own home. That's all changed now. 3 weeks ago, we bought another Ford, the new low-priced custom-line Victoria. Isn't it stunning? Dave has it all to himself, and I now have the ranch wagon all to myself. It's a whole new way of life. Now I'm free to go anywhere, do anything, see anybody anytime I want to. It's only good common sense. Why be stuck with one expensive car when you can enjoy all the fun and freedom of 2 fine Fords?
Episode 2. We're now entering an era where cars are just as much a status symbol as they were in the decades before, except now we're living in a golden era of high-performance cars. And Americans wanted high performance. By 1970, nearly 70% of all American families own at least one car, and the car began to symbolize ideals of freedom. But this freedom needed to be fueled. And by 1973, nearly 1/3 of all the oil usage in America was coming from imported oil. Thousands of gallons of this natural resource were coming from the Middle East. But the Middle East had other plans for the United States. In 1973, they imposed an embargo on the oil supply and brought the dream to a screeching halt. Americans watched in shock and disbelief as they saw the price of oil per barrel rise from $3 to $12. The price of gas to fuel their cars soared beyond reach. And the people panicked. Anxious families rushed to the gas pumps to get the last supplies. Instead of driving less and saving gas, they had decided to double down, and they refused to share their resources. But President Carter at the time had warned them to slow down and conserve energy. He said to them, "We must not be selfish or timid if we hope to have a decent world for our children and grandchildren. We must balance our demand for energy with our rapidly shrinking resources." But Americans chose not to pay heed to Carter's call for conservation. In fact, Carter Kiss My Gas became a popular bumper sticker. While others thought that their shrinking resources were a threat to their way of life. And in 1979, they burned cars and ransacked gas stations in Levittown, Pennsylvania, as a way of expressing their frustration with the state of the economy. So we saw how the car symbolized the American dream, and when somebody limited that dream, they felt outraged because they thought that they could have and do it all. They longed for the dream to be unlimited.
Hey world, who do you take traveling?
MasterCard and we can do it all.
For shopping, dining, traveling. For emergency cash at over 60,000 locations. It's the only credit card you really need.
MasterCard and me, we can do it all.
Episode 3, the people could do it all, and finally, their wish was granted. They're now entering an era where credit cards have become commonplace. From banks to stores, the words "charge it" became a motto at the cash register. Noam Chomsky describes the economy of the 80s perfectly when he says, "Finance was freed, speculation boomed, huge amounts of capital started going into speculation. The entire economy became financialized." But just as financialization was becoming a priority for America, the people once again failed to realize that the economy was working against them. And once again, in October of 1987, the stock market crashed. History repeated itself, and huge amounts of market value were wiped away from companies in just a day. This was the biggest one-day drop in America's stock market history. The Dow plunged a gut-wrenching 508 points. And again, the people were warned when Lee Iacocca told them the market slide was a shot right between the eyes. We can't keep romping forever on borrowed money. He knew that playing invisible games with the economy like this was risky and dangerous. But why would the people listen? The Berlin Wall fell in 1989, showing the world that the people of East Berlin had clearly chosen the risk and freedom of capitalism over the safety net of communism. And Americans had truly witnessed the ultimate victory of capitalism over communism on a world stage. They were convinced that there was no alternative to freedom and that there was no turning back. But were they interested in freedom or French fries? Did they want liberty or the power of limitless shopping on a credit card? The new dream then became to keep buying beyond their means. And so the people did. By then, nearly 50% of all of America's retail dollars were coming from its 30,000 shopping malls. And so we saw how the unlimited credit card became the unlimited dream, and when financialization had rendered the economy vulnerable, the people refused to listen because they had already cultivated a new attitude towards money. We see this epitomized in the form of this board game commercial that was being marketed heavily towards young girls at the time.
Got your credit card? It's Mall Madness. With Mall Madness, you get it all. A bank account and your own credit card.
Darren at the Sunglass Boutique.
Mall Madness really talks. To win, buy everything on your list and be first out of the mall.
I win! Attention, mall shoppers.
Mall Madness, the electronic shopping game that really talks.
Episode 4. It was the start of a new era.
Welcome. You've got mail.
Americans began to fall in love with the internet. Windows 95 made the computing experience accessible to the everyday user, and it allowed capitalism to compete on the global stage. Brands like Sony became pivotal to the overall formation of global capitalism. And get big fast became the new philosophy for business. Like Amazon's Jeff Bezos, he believed in focusing on growth over profit. This was highly controversial at the time, and he was certainly criticized. But in the end, we all see how that worked out, definitely in his favor. However, Jeff was not the exception. Jeff was the exception, but not the rule. Many businesses tried to follow this same model and ended up failing miserably in the process. But another example of a successful e-commerce at the time is that of eBay. Even hobbyists began to realize that they too could make a quick buck, and they could do it from the comfort of their own homes. In fact, at the time in 1998, 8% of eBay sales actually came from Beanie Babies. And this has often been compared to tulip mania, which happened in 1636 in the Netherlands, where the cost of tulips far exceeded its intrinsic value. And then Americans everywhere also wanted to partake in the new American sport, and NASDAQ was the way to do it. Books like An Idiot's Guide to Day Trading made almost anyone feel like they could participate, and it taught us that risk is necessary for reward. This led us into momentum theory. We didn't question get-rich-quick schemes because we believed that it was going to keep going. We didn't question momentum theory because we believed it was going to keep going. But it was all too far too fast. When the dot-com bubble burst in 2001, nearly $1 trillion in stock value evaporated in less than 30 days. And matters only got worse on the tragic day of September 11. The Dow plummeted 600 points, and we completely stopped trading for 3 consecutive days. But there were warning signs, whether or not we realized them. When the World Trade Organization got together to speak about liberalizing the markets, people got angry and they decided to protest. They believed that capitalism was not looking out after their best interests. But again, we completely disregarded it, and media called them violent anarchists. Not too much later, Naomi Klein released her iconic book, No Logo, and it completely shook the marketing world. It created a movement. She spoke out against brands and how they were affecting the world. But once again, we did not listen. We liked our things way too much and the freedom that came along with it. But we began liking our things a little bit too much. Hoarding became an epidemic, and you can see that through shows like TLC's Hoarding Buried Alive. And what this taught us was that the speed of success taught people to expect the dream in an instant. Reality shows like American Idol, Survivor, Laguna Beach, they showed us how average people became stars overnight. And so the internet completely changed the American dream. It actually put it in hyperdrive. And when the dot-com bubble burst, we didn't know what to expect. But instead of facing the reality, the truth, and the facts, we completely shifted our focus to the idea of overnight success.
Everybody gets a card!
Episode 5. As we enter the 21st century, demanding the dream in an instant extends once again to home ownership. Extreme Makeover Home Edition becomes one of the most popular shows on television. But after the cameras stopped rolling, many of these contestants weren't able to afford their mortgages, their taxes, or even their utilities. House hunters. House Hunters on Vacation, House Hunters International, Tiny House Hunters become some of the most popular shows on daytime television. As Martha Stewart says, our families and our homes are the center of American life. At the end of the day, that is the American dream. All the rest is window dressing.
I believe there is such a thing as the American dream. And I believe those of us who have been given positions of responsibility must do everything we can to spotlight the dream and to make sure the dream shines in all neighborhoods, all throughout our country. Owning a home is a part of that dream.
Part of former President Bush's home ownership plan included the American Dream Down Payment Fund, which were grants offered to incentivize new mortgages to low and medium income families. And Americans listened to their president. As savings dwindled, credit card debt rose. And if that doesn't look alarming enough, home mortgage debt grew exponentially compared to consumer credit. In hindsight, this obviously looks like a recipe for disaster.
This is your basic mortgage bond. All right? The originals were simple. They were just thousands of AAA mortgages bundled together, guaranteed by the US government. The modern ones are different. They're private, and they're made up of layers of tranches. Now, obviously, if you're buying these, you can make more money, but they're a little risky. Sometimes they fail. Chris? Somewhere along the line, these Bs and double Bs went from a little risky to dog shit. No income verification. Adjustable rates, dog shit. The default rates are already up from 1% to 4%, fellas. And if they rise to 8%, and they will, A lot of these triple Bs are going to zero, too.
You're saying that at 8% the bonds fail, and we are already at 4%?
That's right.
If they go to 8, it's Armageddon.
No one is paying attention because the banks are too busy getting paid obscene fees to sell these bonds. Zero. Bs, zero. Double Bs, zero. Triple Bs, zero. And then that happens.
What is that?
That's America's housing market.
Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate. The stock market is now down 21%.
Because we're now down 43%.
What in the world is happening on Wall Street?
Two-year no yields went from 190 to 166 in the blink of an eye.
I mean, this is volatility we haven't seen, of course, since way before you and I were born, even before our grandparents, 1929.
So almost everything there completely wiped out. And the NASDAQ, everything and more has been completely wiped out.
The Dow traders are standing there watching in amazement, and I don't blame them.
It was the worst day on Wall Street since the crash of 1987.
The market crash of September 29, 2008 quickly escalated into a global financial crisis. Lehman Brothers announces the biggest bankruptcy filing in history. But this isn't just imaginary numbers we're talking about. These are people's homes. 3.6 million homes were foreclosed, and Americans did not know it hit them. But the banks were bailed out. Henry Paulson, U.S. Secretary Treasury at the time and former CEO of Goldman Sachs, warned the president of the volatile housing market, and he did not listen to those warnings. But he bailed out the banks for he bailed out 972 banks for over $600 billion. But the people did not get a bailout. And out of desperation, they began occupying each other's homes in order to stop the banks from being able to take them. Occupying homes turned into occupying the streets. Occupying streets turned into occupying Wall Street. And the veil became lifted of the corruption that lay just below the surface of capitalism. But everything is okay, so please continue shopping. While people protested and marched, we still continue to spend beyond our means. So we saw, at the turn of the 21st century, Americans still believe in the American dream, even if they have to borrow it. But the market, the economy, let the people down, and we saw one of the biggest crashes in history. But that doesn't stop us from spending beyond our means.
The American dream has failed you. Work hard, play by the rules. You aren't guaranteed success. Your children will not have a better life than you did.
Through all 5 episodes, we see the same pattern emerging. Whether it's a crash, a crisis, or a bubble being burst, the same pattern is repeated over and over again in search of the American dream. Over and over, again and again. How do we keep doing this? We do this because the American dream is a scheme. A scheme in which we were told the foundation for the dream was a house, when what we should have been questioning was what we were looking for comes in the value of a home. Why do we show compassion for those that lost theirs in the housing bubble, but failed to have any tangible action to do anything about it? All con schemes start the same way. There's the tale. It's a story that's based on logic and persuasion. Once the con finds its mark, they take the victim in. By the time we realize what has happened, it's too late. What do we do next? Instead of cutting our losses, we double down. So why do cons work? Cons work because we are the willing victim. It is our own hopes and desires that the con plays off of. And that is the foundation for the dream. the dream of the house, the dream in which the housing bubble may have changed for some, but we didn't acknowledge what was happening. What do we say to those that were so disappointed by this dream that they stopped trying? The so-called boomerang kids, as they're called, who have done nothing but sleep on their couch and not quite come to terms with what is happening. And what do we do about the materialism, a dream that is based on stuff? And the stuff in the oceans. We look at supply and demand as if we have finite resources, but that is not the case. Is this what Adams meant by better, richer, fuller? We live in a state of self-interest that is so extreme, there's constant comparison. We're not only comparing ourselves to others, but we're even comparing our potential mates by swiping left. We're constantly looking for more, looking for better. Always the next upgrade, nothing is ever quite good enough. Instead of acknowledging this state of disillusionment, we're constantly thinking, what is the next thing to come? We are never quite happy with where we are. And what do we do instead? We fake it on Instagram. The extremes of self-interest have gotten so out of hand that we even put it above our own self-care, as shown in this Fiverr campaign. The copy reads, "You eat a coffee for lunch," as if foregoing lunch is somehow a noble action. We're killing it while we're killing ourselves. And the extremes are so out of hand that the idea of feeding on another person, if you have enough money, is okay in a capitalist system on hyperdrive. We are becoming vampires in our state of better, richer, fuller. All 5 episodes have the same problem, and they're only getting faster. So we have to ask ourselves, are we ready for the next episode? Another crash will be happening. It's just a matter of when. At the heart of capitalism lies the idea of self-interest, the Darwinian notion of survival of the fittest that justifies bad behavior, short-term profits offer long-term consequences, and it allows companies like Get to acquire Juno, and while they win the business competition, what do? They leave the values that customers championed by the wayside. Our blinders are on when it comes to the system of supply and demand. We think the resources will never run out, and we think the party will never end. But that is not the case. That is not what history teaches us. For this reason, we believe the American dream is unattainable because capitalism promotes self-interest over environment, employees, customers, community, industry, everything. When the term the American dream was coined in 1931, it promised that life should be better, richer, fuller for everyone according to opportunity or achievements. We realize now that this is a scheme in which better, richer, fuller is out of control comparison and competition. A scheme in which opportunity is based on your birth position. And achievement, well, that's only if you're debt-free. Capitalism did not kill the American dream. It just turned the dream into a nightmare. But we can wake up.
We live in a time of awareness, and every day, citizens are trying to unveil the truth. It's not too late to make a change. We can restore capitalism. So what if we take the American dream and shift it into the American mantra? Life could be fair, enriched, and meaningful for everyone. Fair as in doing no harm. Enriched is adding value. Meaningful is having a purpose more than just a profit. And for everyone includes the shareholders, employees, customers, and the environment. When we're not looking at where we stand or who we're standing next to, we're not focusing on the community. And community and our ethic practices are intangible assets. These intangible assets are not being accounted for. And when they're not being accounted for, that makes capitalism incomplete. So we want to value the intangible.
So these personal relationships and ethical business practices that we just spoke about are on the sidelines because they're difficult to quantify. We need to complete capitalism by accounting for the intangible. But how do we measure kindness and caring? How do we allow businesses to calculate how they treat everyone within them and everything around them? Well, it turns out that organizations are already starting to do this. B Labs is a nonprofit organization that focuses on using the power of business as a force for good. They use about 4 parameters to determine a company's impact and eventually certify them as B corporations. But the score misses a few factors. For one, the score isn't very user-friendly. So while companies must earn at least 80 out of 200 points to be certified as a B Corp, the score doesn't really appear anywhere on a tangible consumer touchpoint. They're also often confused with benefit corporations, where all you have to do is join and become a legal entity. The score also does not account for the quality of the interactions with customers through some form of social media listening, for example. Another organization that does this is the empathy business that has created a global empathy index. It's sort of like a corporate Fitbit for empathy. And they determine a company's empathy levels and release yearly reports. But again, the score misses a few factors. For one, they don't account for a business's environmental impact. It's also unclear how they calculate the rating, and they maintain a narrow focus on just internal culture, CEO performance, and social media presence. What we are determined to do is to combine the best of both these worlds and create a new rating system that we are calling the C-score, as a tribute to the C of complete capitalism. Through the system, we want to evaluate every aspect of a business. How does a business impact its environment? How does it treat its employees? Do they keep their customers satisfied? Are they committed to creating jobs within their community? And by ensuring best practices, are they really pushing the industry forward? Well, let's take a real-world example and analyze Patagonia and see the C-score in action. So this rating system ranges on a spectrum of a -5 to a +5. So the C-score could range anywhere between a -5 to a +5. But how do we arrive at a simple score like this? Well, there are 11 scores in all, and each score corresponds to a number. We evaluate each aspect of the score out of a total of 11 points, and when we add all of the points assigned to each aspect of the score, we get a total, which in this case is 150. So how does this fraction relate to the rating scale that we've just seen? We divide it by 15 and get the lowest ratio, which gives us a 10 on 11. That corresponds directly to a positive score on this rating scale. And therefore, Patagonia would merit for a +4 to the C-score rating system. And that's enough math for today.
So we're going to carry out this rating system and build trust with the creation of a new brand, the Visible Hand. The Visible Hand is a brand for the people. Instead of waiting for the invisible hand to eventually right-size capitalism, the Visible Hand will right-size capitalism through information by valuing the intangible. The 3 fingers on the hand represent fairness, enrichment, and meaningfulness. And the eye represents the eye of the people who are always watching, and the people who want an even and fair playing field. The brand will be decorated in colors of black, white, and yellow. Yellow is a signifier of caution as well as a symbol of optimism. The Visible Hand will be protecting consumers as well as inspiring companies to do better. And this rating system that Shivani just laid out would look something like this to consumers. As you can see, it's pretty simple. If you have a negative score, you're doing more harm than good. And if you have a positive score, you're doing more good than harm. The Visible Hand will be a for-profit company made up of financial analysts, brand consultants, social media listeners, and researchers. After initial funding round, we will get our C-score in action by approaching local companies as well as using the public information of public companies available. Next, we'll approach investors. We think that they'll invest with us because this tool will be really useful for them to use in the future. Next, we'll tout our rating and our consulting services. Initially, we'll make money by consulting on external and internal company culture. And as we grow, then we can start charging businesses for the services of our rating system. Our first major space for impact will be integration with e-commerce. And it could look something like this. So we saw how impactful customer ratings are on Amazon to selling products. Imagine if you could get the products that you wanted, and you could also know that the companies you're buying them from are fair, enriched, and meaningful. You could even have this badge on the products themselves. Or it could be displayed in the fronts of windows as a badge of honor, indicating that this company cares about more than just profits. So why do we think this will work? Well, we've seen it happen before. You may have noticed this rating system in the fronts of restaurants in New York City. This rating system started in 1997 in Los Angeles after atrocious conditions were exposed on the news media. And in the first year of this rating system being implemented, restaurants that were rated with an A rating saw an increase of sales of 5.7%. And what's more is that the entire community benefited. The amount of foodborne illnesses in the area went down by 13%. So while this rating system may seem small, this could have potential for big impact. And imagine the type of impact we could have if people cared about the C-score as much as they cared about the daily change of a stock price. The Visible Hand could be part of the daily conversation and encourage companies to value more than just profits and value purpose. And you guys could become part of the C-score as well. The Visible Hand will partner with a mobile banking app called Mint that would track your spending habits. You would get your own C-score depending on what kinds of companies you support with your dollars. And since companies are beholden to annual and quarterly reports, the Visible Hand will put out their own report, except for this report will be global and user-friendly. No jargon, not 100 pages. And it'll evaluate things that are tangible as well as intangible. Things like, how are companies impacting the environment? Which companies are the most empathetic to their communities? In these ways, we think that our rating system and our global annual report will encourage companies to make policy change as well as mindset change. But this isn't enough. What about the people? In our surveys of more than 200 people, we heard things like this time and time again, that crippling student loan debt is sidelining an entire generation. And more than 60% of the people we talked to said that debt was the number one thing holding them back from achieving their dreams. So we want to create a movement called Lend a Hand. And this is a movement that sees a world where people are not held back by crippling debt. And it would look something like this. Lend a Hand would be hosted on the Visible Hand's website, so everything is in one place. And it would be a Kickstarter-like campaign that partners people who are in need with those who are willing to donate. Here you can read about people's hopes and dreams, what they want to accomplish with the money. You could get verified reviews and GPAs, and we could really start making a change. And we've already seen this happening. We think this will engage the 1% instead of demonizing them like in Occupy Wall Street. This woman here, Agnes Gund, she donated a $100 million one-of-a-kind Liechtenstein painting in order to reform the criminal justice system in America. And in May, rapper Nicki Minaj took student debt loans into her own hands. She tweeted that anyone who could verify a 4.0 GPA would get their entire college tuition funded. So the point is, whether you're rich or you're poor, if you're unhappy with the state of this country, taking matters into your own hands is a basic human emotion. And we think it'll look something like this, where even $10 could make an impact to see a world where artists aren't crippled by debt, Or employees could encourage their own companies to get involved to lend a hand. Imagine the impact we could have if celebrities were willing to champion the cause as well. And eventually, this movement will become a universal gesture, not just for donation, but for fairness, enrichment, and meaningfulness. Imagine how simple it could be if everybody worked hard and was nice to each other. The entire planet would profit. So this isn't communism or socialism that we're proposing. We're proposing a mindset change for capitalism, where we value not just self-interest, but empathy, and not just profits, but purpose. And the beauty of it is, if we demand this, the supply will change, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's profitable. So, what does this world look like in a world of complete capitalism? Well, we have 2 cows. You feed them non-pesticidal grass, and you give them comfort and safety. In exchange, they give you fresh, natural milk. And you run your farm this way because the people demand a fair sourcing of milk over your non-sustainable competitors. You enjoy an enriched life based on the extra profits that you enjoy, and the people enjoy meaningful time with their families as they pour this fresh milk over their cereal every morning, knowing that their dollar has contributed to an entire system that is fair, enriched, and meaningful. The entire planet profits. Thank you.
The American dream is dead.
The American dream dead. The American dream dead. The American dream is dead.
Try. The American dream is dead.
The American dream is dead.
Does the American dream have to be about stuff?
Well, it used to be that the American dream was defined by freedom and opportunity, and now people relate money to it.
Is $28,000, could we call that attaining the American dream or getting closer to the American dream?
A lot of people feel like it might be unattainable right now because there's such, a dearth of jobs. It's so hard to borrow money nowadays.
College is extraordinarily expensive to go to.
Do so many have flat screens, and do so many have a home that it couldn't always continue the way in which it had been?
Flat screen TVs were not included in the original definition of the American dream. That's not only because the term was first coined in 1931, but because of what its author, James Treslow Adams, believed about America. He said that the American dream that had lured tens of millions of all nations to our shores over the past century has not been a dream of material plenty, though that has doubtlessly counted heavily. So Adams understood that material possessions played some role in the American dream, but to him, the far more important aspect was that the American dream promised a life where every man and woman, regardless of class, is able to grow, unhampered and unrepressed, to achieve their fullest development. Ultimately, what he was talking about was a society that values freedom and equality, enabling upward mobility, with a moderate provision for material things along the way. But today, this is how we buy things. And this is how we make things today. Our consumption has led to numerous issues. Environmental and labor abuses are just the beginning. So what we see is that not only are the values of the American dream absent from our system of commerce, how we've come to define and fulfill the American dream is actually fueling these issues. And that brings us to why we're here today. The American dream must be repositioned to get us out of this mess. And in order to do that, we need to understand how we got here, how the American dream came to be defined through material things. Our story starts roughly 400 years ago. This is John Winthrop, who sailed to Massachusetts in 1630, leading a group to colonize America. Their intent, beyond seeking religious freedom, was to establish a moral economy. They cared less about profit and more about conducting business with values. And those values set the precedent for broader systems across the colonies. Authorities issued corporate charters, essentially the licenses to conduct business, with the expectation that business would serve the common good. And that meant building bridges and turnpikes and other utilities that would develop our country, not just make a profit. So we see that in colonial and early America, business prioritized values over profit, and our founding fathers established a system where business served the common good. The founding fathers operated under the long-term goal of building our country, not just trying to make a quick buck. Then, in the Industrial Revolution, everything changed.
So the government continued to build the infrastructure that would serve the common good and to fuel innovation. But after spending all their investments in canals and turnpikes, there wasn't any budget left in investing in the latest technology, railroads. Therefore, the government turned to corporations for help. But the corporations took advantage of the situation and negotiated limited liability, essentially meaning limited responsibility in case the railroads has failed to generate a profit. The government wasn't in a position to say no, so the corporate charter laws were amended to allow limited liability. Then the railroads became a success, a wild success. However, the limited liability allowed for some questionable business practices. Cartels formed and conspired to fix prices, squeezing farmer customers who depended on these railroads to ship crops eastward to market. And the volatility of this competition led the railroad companies to ask the government for help. But that backfired. The government decided to side with the farmers, and they created the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887. This was the first act to defend consumers from being taken advantage by corporations. But this legislation didn't deter the movement of goods. Advancements in manufacturing brought new products into the market, and the railroads became an indispensable part of this transportation. This also gave rise to retail stores with increased availability of goods, creating the first retail store, some as huge as an entire New York City block. This new kind of store that differs so dramatically from the local specialty shops before it was an important factor in changing our relationship to goods. But not all industrial advancements progressed society. We had meat packing plants in Chicago with tainted meat sickening customers. We had sweatshops right here in Manhattan, including the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. And in 1911, this very factory caught fire, killing 146 women and children. After public outcry, the government passed legislation that protected workers and created agencies like the Food and Drug Administration that protected customers and defended the values of the American dream from unscrupulous businesses. During the Industrial Revolution, corporations ignored their responsibilities to the common good. And government stepped in to preserve the values of business and to protect consumers. While the government was busy regulating industry, the financial sector was booming unregulated. Wall Street allowed investors to purchase stocks on credit, and that overvalued the entire stock market. Factories were turning in more goods than consumers could ever buy. And in 1925, Ford was making 6 cars per minute. Combined with Combined with consumers assuming more and more personal debt, you had a recipe for disaster, which led to the stock market crisis of 1929, and then the Great Depression. By 1933, 15 million people were unemployed. This equates to the same number of people who are currently living in Los Angeles, New York City, and Chicago combined. And because food and jobs were so scarce, the government led by Franklin D. Roosevelt stepped in and introduced the New Deal. The New Deal created jobs, protected workers' rights, funded state budgets, and created Social Security. It also established fair rules for the stock market and the government to play by in hopes of preventing another market crash. During the Great Depression, the government regulated Wall Street to protect the economy and the country. While the New Deal helped us recover from the Great Depression, it did not fully restore the economy completely. In fact, it was actually the government spending and the war orders from Britain for World War II that helped restore the economy. And in 1941, we were at war once again. Men were drafted and sent overseas to serve our country, and then the women joined the workforce to keep the factories running. This meant that this was the first time in history that families were having a double income. However, there was nothing to spend this double income on because manufacturing was focused on the war effort rather than producing consumer goods. This led to rations such as coffee, tea, and sugar. And when the war was over and men came back from overseas, families had amassed significant savings from the past several years, and this would create a dramatic change in our culture.
Businesses soon realized that consumers had saved money to spend. In need of a new market to sell to, companies that used to manufacture for the war now started producing consumer goods. And they used the technology from the wartime to make these new products. And this flooded the market with new products, and it's how plastics became popular. Plastics were heavily marketed as the product of the future. It was said to be a safe, inexpensive, and sanitary substance to use. The famous Tupperware parties helped shape plastics as a wholesome American domesticity. And plastics came just in time, as much of the population was moving to the suburbs. And they had new homes to furnish and decorate. And in these communities, people started comparing their belongings, which increased their spending in order to keep up with the Joneses. And if comparing yourself to your neighbor wasn't enough, the invention of television and new sophisticated psychological marketing techniques showed you what to buy and how to live. These new techniques fueled the demand for new products and led to the rapid growth of the advertising industry. Manufacturers had another strategy to drive demand for their product. They created and promoted various colors and styles of their products. This phenomenon came to be called planned obsolescence, which meant instilling in the buyer the desire to own something a little better, a little newer, and a little sooner than was necessary. And a combination of these facts, keeping up with the Joneses, planned obsolescence, advertising, new houses, this all led to a culture of consumerism, where we shopped to fulfillment, but we actually weren't fulfilled. According to cultural critic and author Daniel Pink, humans tend to metabolize their purchases very quickly, meaning that the new product you bought, where you hoped you had joy from it, the purchases actually became mundane after you made those purchases. And this looked like this. You realized you wanted a product, and you needed to earn money to get that product. Once you purchased it and you thought you were satisfied, you grew tired of that product, and you wanted another product. And this cycle, this never-ending cycle, was called the hedonic treadmill. And the hedonic treadmill had a radical effect on our culture. And as a result, the fulfillment of the American dream now came to mean acquiring things.
But was this really also bad? This was a very prosperous time in America where spending increased by 60%. The gross national product more than doubled from 1945 to 1960, from $200 to $500 billion. But it wasn't all good news. During the 50s and 60s, household debt also doubled. By the 1970s, President Jimmy Carter recognized the dangers and ill effects of this culture of consumerism, which led to his speech titled "A Crisis of Confidence."
In a nation that was proud of hard work, strong families, close-knit communities, and our faith in God, too many of us now tend to worship self-indulgence and consumption. Human identity is no longer defined by what one does, but by what one owns. But we've discovered that owning things and consuming things does not satisfy our longing for meaning. All the traditions of our past, all the lessons of our heritage, all the promises of our future point to another path, the path of common purpose and the restoration of American values. That path leads to true freedom for our nation and ourselves.
President Carter further told us that there was no simple way to avoid sacrifice. And this is not something the American people wanted to hear in the midst of the energy crisis of the 1970s. Not only were the president's words seen as out of touch, but his challenges to our culture of consumerism were seen as a threat to the American way of life. This did little to slow down that culture of consumption, and actually led to the end of President Carter's one-term presidency and with the landslide victory of Ronald Reagan in the election of 1980. When Ronald Reagan came into office, he gave businesses exactly what they had been asking for: deregulation and lower taxes. This created a stock market boom and also a shift in the culture of the financial industry, as was highlighted in the 1987 film Wall Street, starring Michael Douglas as Gordon Gekko.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Greed in all of its forms. Greed for life, for money, for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind, and greed, you mark my words, will not only save Teldar Paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA.
So Gordon Gekko told us that greed was good for America. But this greed actually led to businesses shipping jobs overseas as they focused on profit above all else. This shift of jobs overseas lowered labor costs and made goods even more affordable. At the same time, credit cards became even more accessible, and it led to binge buying and what author Tom Wolfe described as the splurge generation. This consumption was glamorized in pop culture with board games like Mall Madness, Madonna's hit song and video, Material Girl, and game shows like this one.
Ready, set, and go. First blood, keep her exchange.
Exchange!
She says exchange. She's going right up those stairs. Little shuffle first. Be careful. Be careful. Harry's House of Music and Video. Whoa! Hit the bell. You all right? You okay?
During the 70s and 80s, government gave business the freedom they wanted, and business used profit, not values, to make decisions.
But as consumption rose and jobs continued to move overseas, we had less and less visibility into how our products were being made and the business practices behind them. We saw this in the 1990s with the expose and continued coverage of Nike's use of sweatshops and child labor. The scandal lasted throughout the decade and tarnished Nike's brand image. We saw this again in 2001 when 15,000 children between the ages of 9 and 12 were tricked or sold into slavery to work on West African cocoa farms that supplied chocolate to Nestle. And how much were these children's lives worth to their captors? Just $30 each. And the scandal continued as Nestle failed to meet their own benchmarks for improved supply chain accountability. We saw this again in 2013 with the collapse of the Rana Plaza building in Bangladesh, which killed 1,135 people. They supplied garments for the brands you see here, and the brands were scrutinized immediately following the collapse, and again a year later when half had still failed to compensate workers and their families. Today, 1/3 of the pollution in China can be attributed to the manufacture of cheap goods for the US and Europe. And pollution in China kills 1 million people a year. This is not what freedom looks like. This is not what equality looks like. This is not upward mobility. These practices are in direct opposition to the values of the American dream.
So what's guiding these behaviors? Well, remember this guy? A lot of it has to do with the financial system that he operates in. Today, the tax system incentivizes short-term profit over long-term investment. Digital technology has allowed for electronic trading, and he can now make thousands of trades every minute. Technology has also allowed for the ready availability of information to stockholders, and that leads to them expecting a quick turn on their investment. And companies today are expected to meet quarterly earnings expectations. This all leads to unethical business practices, as was evidenced last year with the Wells Fargo scandal, where over 2 million fraudulent accounts were opened in their customers' names without their knowledge just to meet their quarterly goals. And it's not just Wells Fargo. 80% of CFOs said they would sacrifice their company's overall value just to meet quarterly expectations. This has led to a decrease in long-term investment and research and development spending, and the US has now dropped to 10th in the world in R&D spending, and we used to be second. Today, businesses prioritize short-term profit over long-term investment and sustainability.
So we come a long, long way from the days of John Winthrop and his goal to establish a moral economy and to conduct business with the values of the American dream to where we are now. But the good news is people still care. We interviewed people on the streets asking them what are some of their values that they live by, and here's what they said.
Have the equal opportunity.
To have like different freedoms.
Freedom. You have to like act better and better yourself in order to help others around you.
Honesty. To treat others as I wish to be treated.
We see that the values of the American dream are alive and well in individuals. But how do we apply these values into our lives? For this, we also asked people on the streets and asked them if they shop with their values in mind, and here's what they said.
I tend to just choose the cheapest options without really thinking about values.
I don't really develop a strategy on buying brands by where they're made or who made them. It's more of a, if I see it, I want it, I just buy it.
I must confess today that I made a special trip to Gucci because I love Harry Styles, and he's been on James Corden rocking Gucci.
It is hard to find things with ethical sources.
I'm not sure if I really think about that very much when I buy stuff. I feel like it'd be kind of hard to track where everything comes from, and like at that moment it's not the first thing I'm thinking of. I'm usually just thinking like, oh, kind of like this. Yeah.
I care how the company makes it and all that, but I feel like even if I try to do something about it, it'll be one person against a whole bunch of people that really don't care about it.
There is clearly a disconnect in the values people live by and the way they purchase items. Some people don't believe in the power of their choice. Some people are intimidated by the complexities of our modern manufacturing system. And some people simply can't resist the allure of marketing and advertising. So what do we do given this disconnect? Our commercial sector is deeply flawed, but our global economy depends on individual contributions to keep all the gears moving. And stopping consumption won't solve the problem. In fact, it will create even more problems. Therefore, we can't stop consumerism. Because we believe that consumerism got us into this mess, and we believe that consumerism will get us out of it by consuming products made in the values of the American dream. Freedom, equality, and upward mobility.
Let's first look to see who's already operating in these areas. And that means conducting an audit of mass consumer brands that produce products in an environmentally sustainable fashion, with fair labor practices, and with a concern for social good. And in doing so, we find companies that operate in single areas, like The Honest Company and their concern for the environment, or Lush Cosmetics and their dedication to fair labor. We also see companies like Patagonia, there in the middle, who dedicate efforts in all three areas. With that said, we had expected to be able to place more companies on this chart. But in our investigation, we found company after company had problematic practices that knocked them out of consideration. And then we discovered that many of the brands thought to be the most sustainable and ethical are actually owned by parent multinational corporations that don't uphold their values all the way to the top. So what we're left with is just a handful of brands that could be considered to share the values of the American dream, and only 4 that fully align with our values. 3 of those 4 are in the same specialty category of outdoors recreation equipment. So clearly there's room in that middle section for a much wider range of consumer brands and products that fully align with the values of the American dream. What can we do to get more companies and brands into that center section? We have a solution. Introducing the American Dream Company, or TADCO, a for-profit company founded on and operating under the values of freedom, equality, and upward mobility. Our mission is to solve the world's biggest problems brought on by consumerism. And to do this, TADCO identifies problems ripe for innovation, designs and produces solutions, and then encourages and incentivizes the commercial sector to adopt those solutions. Our goal is to enable the production of products that fully align with the values of the original American dream so that they're available for consumer purchase. TADCO believes that change starts with business because the easiest choice for consumers should be one that aligns with their values. And to enable this change, TADCO will serve as the intermediary between consumers and companies, developing solutions that align consumer needs with business interests and facilitate processes that adhere to the values of the American dream. In doing so, we believe we can solve many of the largest issues we face today.
So where do we start? As we've shown you, consumerism has caused problems in the environment, labor, and in society at large. But we have to start somewhere. We knew that we could have a big impact by making just a small change in something we already buy every day. So we decided to start with water bottles. In 2006, we consumed 300 billion plastic bottles. Last year, we consumed 480 billion. And by 2021, it's expected that we will consume 583 billion plastic bottles. But that's all and that's over 1 million plastic bottles every minute. But that's all okay because of recycling, right? Nope. We trash more than 2/3 of plastic bottles that we consume. And when we do occasionally think that we're doing a good deed by putting that plastic bottle in the blue recycling bin that day, yeah, those don't all get recycled either. Half of anything we think we're recycling doesn't actually get recycled. The industrial process of recycling is complicated with all of the different materials that need to be sorted and cleaned, and the whole process is often more expensive than it's worth. So where does that all end up? The landfill, and if not the landfill, the ocean. Each year, 8 million tons of plastics leaks into the ocean. That's the equivalent of dumping one garbage truck into the ocean every 60 seconds. And by 2050, it is anticipated that there will be more plastic than fish in the sea by weight. So what is TADCO going to do about this? Well, we are going to introduce a reusable water bottle. No, we're not. Contrary to what we would like to believe, reusable water bottles have not slowed down our consumption of disposable plastic bottles. They're not that eco-friendly because many are produced with virgin raw materials, and they're not healthy for us when they contain chemicals like BPA. And worst of all, they're inconvenient. Of course we're going to choose what's most convenient. We're human. Reusable water bottles require work on our part, and that means that we need something that is convenient. We need something that is designed to be thrown away. We need a replacement for the plastic and disposable water bottles, and that means that we need a new material. This material needs to dissolve in salt water because 40% of plastic bottles end up in the ocean. It should biodegrade because the majority of the rest end up in the landfill. It should work in existing bottling machinery with minimal modifications to encourage adoption of this new material by companies and brands that bottle water. It should be transparent because we know that current recycled materials are often cloudy or have a tint to them, and that's a problem for consumers and brands. And this should cost less than plastic to incentivize the adoption of this new material as best we can.
And this is possible. The beginnings are there. Saltwater Brewery created a biodegradable and edible six-pack ring using byproducts of their beer-making process. Kevin Kumala, an inventor from Indonesia, created a shopping bag using cassava starch. This shopping bag is 100% biodegradable and even edible once dissolved in water. There is a biodegradable water bottle made from algae. This was created by a student in Iceland. So if small business owners, inventors, and even students can innovate, how might we rise to the challenge of solving this global problem? Here is our plan. We will take TADCO to Kickstarter to give consumers the power to buy in. We heard earlier that people are on our side. Consumers, they really care, but they often have no choice to purchase with their values. So once TADCO is successfully funded, we will host a competition to create a new material that can change the industry. We will invite scientists, inventors, and educators to participate. And we would like to ask famed innovator and inventor Elon Musk to announce our competition. And also open the call to entries at a press conference. We would also like him to host our competition and judged with a panel of experts. The new material that teams will develop will be judged against the criteria outlined in the brief. And the winners for this competition will receive $1 million cash and TADCO equity as their winning prize. And we will use this material to launch our first product, the TADCO bottle, the first water bottle that is designed to be thrown away without impacting our planet.
We envision producing the TADCO bottle in our own factory based in Detroit. Why Detroit? Detroit has an abundance of available factories and will support the local community in need of revitalization. And in our factory, we'd like to create a showroom. The showroom will help demonstrate the ease of use of our material in various machinery. We'll even invite representatives from bottled water companies to show them that they can replicate this process in their factories as well. The goal of TADCO is not to be a distributor, but rather to get water bottle companies to switch from plastic to using our material, which will reduce the environmental impact by disposable water bottles. And TADCO will be an ingredient brand featuring our logo on bottles that use our material. Even though we won't be a distributor, we do envision using the TADCO bottle to promote awareness of TADCO. For instance, we'd like to partner with JetBlue to become their official bottled water provider and have bottled water at community events such as the New York City Marathon. And we'll even take our material on the road, and we'll have a traveling pop-up shop stopping at numerous locations to showcase the TADCO bottle and bring awareness. And once consumers get really excited about TADCO, we'll drive them to sign a petition to encourage their favorite bottled water companies to make the switch from plastic to our material.
Between our innovative new material, our factory showroom that just shows just how easy it is to switch, and direct consumer engagement, there will be no reason for bottled water companies to continue using plastic. Our material will be the clear winner. And this will mean success for TADCO. Our revenue model will be based on licensing the intellectual property of our new material to those bottled water companies. And while we are a for-profit company, we also believe in the values of the American dream. So once we've raised enough revenue to cover our daily operating expenses and fund our next project, we will release that intellectual property, making it open source to further encourage adoption. With this first success, showing that you can innovate in the commercial sector while solving the problems caused by consumerism, we will be an example for other businesses to show that you can be successful while upholding the values of the American dream. Building on this success, we can encourage more diverse funding options, looking at things like a small business fund, innovation fund grant, DARPA grants, or even partnerships with organizations like the Red Cross.
But this is just the beginning. The TADCO bottle is the first in a series of products that will change the way we treat our world and each other by leaning into consumerism to solve our world's problems. Imagine when we don't produce 12 million tons of toxic e-waste a year, when there aren't 500,000 Americans living on the streets, and when we don't waste 40% of our food supply while others go hungry. Imagine instead that TADCO innovates around the sustainability of our electronics, preserving our planet while advancing technology. And imagine if TADCO innovates around how building materials are produced and distributed, making homes more accessible to those in need. And imagine if TADCO innovates around how we grow, package, and sell food, making healthy meals available to everyone. This is the world we envision with TADCO in it. We believe consumerism got us into this mess, and we believe consumerism will get us out. Thank you very much.
I'll be honest, Mexico will pay for the wall. Mexico.
The day we sweat out on the streets and run.
The reason why I'm here today is actually because of one man. That man was my grandfather. His name was Rafael Chiza, and he was of Quechua indigenous descent of Ecuador. He came for the first time in 1975 to pursue one particular thing, to improve the quality of life of his family, his wife, his 7 children, and not yet born, but future 14 grandchildren. I am one of them. And we have been here in this country for 3 generations now. My grandparents would have been the first, my parents would be the second, and I would be the third.
Hi, my name is Rosario. In 1982, my family fled Nicaragua because of the civil war that was happening there. My dad was a newspaper editor at the time, and given the dangers of his job, he had to leave the country through the border with Costa Rica. My mom had to come to the US by herself with my 3 older sisters and 6 months pregnant of me. The US at that time was giving political asylum to refugees of war in Central America, and my family relocated to Michigan, where a Catholic community embraced us and gave us a new home. I'm always amazed at how brave my parents were when they tell me stories about all those difficult years. And my family is eternally grateful to this country for the freedom that it provided us.
My name is Benjamin. I'm a 4th generation Austrian American, and this is my family. We all wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my great-grandmother, Maria Stefanik. She came from Austria in 1904 through Ellis Island. She was brave. She was courageous. She had a dream for a better life. We all come from immigrants. We all come from somewhere.
We are just a few examples of the many immigrants living in the US. Today, of the 350 million people in the US, 43 million are immigrants. The US has been home to more immigrants than any other country in the world. And ever since this country was founded, immigrants have been part of its DNA. From the arrival of the Pilgrims in the 1620s, the US was viewed as this new world of opportunity. This first wave of immigrants came here fleeing persecution and looking for a better world. They traveled months on boats through the harsh conditions to find refuge in this land that offered opportunity and a better future for all. And many of the descendants of these first settlers were the founding fathers. Among them, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, and George Washington. And they founded this country with a vision that the US was to be different, to be enlightened, and with the vision that all people are created equal, with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Throughout the years, immigrants came here for a variety of reasons. Some were brought here by force, but all came here to work and to build this nation which had vast amounts of land and offered unlimited potential. And the US embraced them. However, the history of immigration is also one of discrimination and prejudice. Immigration sometimes has signaled opportunity, and at other times, it has signaled threat. For example, during the Irish potato famine, more than 1 million adults and children came to the US for refuge. They settled in cities like Boston and Chicago, and they were essential to building these cities and became a vibrant part of the American fabric. However, during this same time, prejudice against Irish and Catholics hit an all-time high with the founding of the Know Nothing Party, which was founded in order to purify American politics. This political party was threatened by this concept of other people in their land. But immigration signaled opportunity during the California Gold Rush and the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. At this time, Chinese immigrants were welcomed as they worked on one of the largest technological achievements to the day. These immigrants laid rails of 2,000 miles of rugged terrain by hand. And although they were essential to building basic infrastructure in the country, the Chinese Exclusion Act was enacted to stop their influx. This was the first law that was ever enacted to stop a specific ethnic group from entering the country. During the late 19th century, political and economic turmoil in Europe fueled the largest mass migration in human history. At this time here in the US, individual states managed immigration, and the federal government saw the need to open a new area to process them because of the large numbers. So Ellis Island was opened on the first day of 1892, and the Statue of Liberty was donated from the French to the Americans and was to be a symbol of freedom and to welcome immigrants. 12 million immigrants came through the doors of Ellis Island. And at the turn of the century, the new Colossus was engraved in the Statue of Liberty, which read, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free." However, during the Great Depression, many jobs were being lost here in the US, and US-born Americans wanted to reserve these jobs to themselves. They wanted all foreign-born people to be sent back home. And President Hoover echoed this when he said, "I favor rigidly restricted immigration. I have, by executive direction, ordered to relieve us of added unemployment." Then the Mexican repatriation took place, where 2 million Mexicans were deported, many which had actually even been born in the US. But then the Bracero program brought them back. This program brought 4.5 million Mexican agricultural workers to the US to fill the labor shortage that was occurring in agriculture. Immigration signaled threat during the attack on Pearl Harbor. This was the first major attack on US soil, and at this time there was rising anxiety related to the sense of security. So President Franklin Roosevelt ordered the incarceration and relocation of 115,000 immigrants of Japanese ancestry. John F. Kennedy marked a big moment in the history of immigration. He was a big advocate for immigrants and immigration. And he fought hard to get rid of all the discriminatory laws that had been enacted since the 1920s. He believed that immigrants were brave and that everyone in the US were descendants of immigrants.
This is a great inheritance. It is a proud privilege to be a citizen of the great republic, to hear its song sung, to realize that we are the descendants of 40 million people who left other countries, other familiar scenes, to come here to the United States to build a new life, to make a new opportunity for themselves and their children. I think it is not a burden, but a privilege to have the chance in 1963 to share that great concept which they felt so deeply among all of our people. To make this really, as it was for them, a new world for us, and indeed for all those who look to us.
In the 1960s, the United States faced pressure. Domestic pressure to change its policy that discriminated based on the individual's place of birth. The Hart-Celler Act, also known as the Immigration Act of 1965, was created to abolish the quota system based on national origins that had been United States immigration policy since the 1920s. This act marked a change in the past US policy that had discriminated against the non-Northern Europeans. The Amnesty Act of 1986 was designed to balance public concerns about increasing illegal immigration with businesses' need for cheap labor and the need to address issues related to the ethnic and racial discrimination. Ronald Reagan believed in the idea of amnesty for those who have lived here and for those who have put down roots and lived here, even though they might have entered illegally. And through the Amnesty Act, he gave the undocumented immigrants an opportunity by providing citizenship to more than 3 million. He said, "We shall continue America's tradition as a land that welcomes people from other countries and resettling those who flee oppression." And in 2012, the undocumented student population was on a rise. A policy called the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, was created by President Obama after the acknowledgement that these undocumented students were largely raised in the United States. The policy gave 800,000 young immigrants an opportunity, a lifeline, to receive a two-year deferred action from deportation and eligibility for a work permit. Throughout the history of immigration, immigrants have supplied the industrial workforce and made America an economic giant. Immigrants have been essential in the history of United States, and immigrants are the building blocks of America. Today, immigration is at its new peak, where 1 million people enter the United States every year. But when we think of immigration, things that come to mind are the Syrian refugee crisis, where millions of people were displaced inside and outside of Syria. The Muslim travel ban, where an executive order was passed by President Trump to ban people from 6 Muslim countries from entering the United States for a period of 90 days. And the proposed Mexican border wall. Immigration has been a political issue. Time and again, politicians have used immigration for their own advantage, and today is no different. Many claim that President Trump ran on an anti-immigration platform, and that got him elected, while others claim that President Obama catered to the immigrants for the same reason, and yet at the same time, 2.5 million deportations took place under Obama administration, and this is the highest number in the history of United States. The history of immigration has been that of highs and of lows, and of opportunities and of threats. And today, immigration has fear and threat written all over it. And this seems to be the same with the American dream. But what exactly is the American dream? The American dream that drew original colonists, that has drawn every wave of immigrants and Americans, is a dream of freedom, equality, and democracy. It is a dream of finding work, working hard, and advancing economically. Having your children start with the advantages that you did not have so that they can begin their economic life at a higher level than you did. However, today, survey reflects that 52% Americans believe that the American dream is dead. 52%. And we investigated the reasons for the dying American dream for this majority. And through our extensive research and after conducting personal interviews, we found that there are 3 major reasons for the dying American dream. The anxiety felt by the Americans because of security, as there is increased terrorism throughout the world. The anxiety felt by the threat of identity because of the changing cultural landscape in the country. And the anxiety felt by a stagnant economy because of rise in prices and loss of opportunities.
A factor affecting the American dream is a threat in security. On September 11th, 2001, terrorists attacked the United States of America, killing over 2,753 people. Americans have been terrified ever since. But it's not just a problem at home. It's a global problem. Terrorism can happen at any place, at any time, anywhere. In fact, 3 in 5 Americans are really afraid of a threat from abroad, as we've seen attacks happen in Boston, Orlando. Americans are looking to blame someone or something. And that something is this beautiful religion known as Islam, with over 1 billion followers worldwide. Another factor affecting the American dream is a cultural identity. 68% of the white working class feel that America is losing its identity. And ever since the 1950s, the white working class has been getting smaller and smaller. And on top of that, over half of the white working class feel like a stranger in their own country. A third factor affecting the American dream is the economy. The middle class is feeling squeezed. Wages have remained stagnant. There's always been a gap between the wealthier in our society and everyone else. But in the last 30 years, something has changed. That gap has become the Grand Canyon. The incomes of the people at the lower end has stagnated. This is what America's economic pie looked like after World War II. Income gains were shared by everyone, with big portions going to everyone. But since the late 1970s, the bottom 90% have seen their share of the pie devoured by the top 1%. And on top of that, everything is getting more and more expensive. Since the 1980s, healthcare is up over 300%, and education is up over 500%. The middle class can no longer keep up. And on top of that, the Great Recession of 2009 hit the middle class really hard, losing 8.8 million jobs. They're having a hard time rebounding. This is how the middle class feels today.
I'm actually having to work 3 jobs, and my husband works 3 jobs as well, and we're still not able to get ahead.
Back when I was a kid, my father worked, my mother stayed home. My father's income was enough for us to survive.
When I was growing up, it was achievable. The white picket fence, being able to own your own home.
I feel like we can never catch up.
It's like you're stuck.
You got to get the millionaires and the billionaires in Washington to start worrying about the working class people.
It feels as if immigration is being blamed for America's hardships. Today, we hear things like, immigrants steal jobs. Immigrants are rapists. They're murderers. They're criminals. And who are we hearing this from? President Trump.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
We are here today to say we want to change the conversation. Immigrants do not pose a threat to security. Let me say that again. Immigrants do not pose a threat to security. In fact, immigrants are less likely to be incarcerated than a US-born American. And there's no correlation between a rise of immigration and a rise in crime. Furthermore, only 12% of terror attacks are actually done by Muslims.
And cultural identity enriches the country. Scientific American says, diversity enhances creativity. It encourages the search for novel information and perspectives, leading to better decision-making and problem-solving. Companies with a diverse workforce see 2.3 times more cash flow per employee than those which are less diverse. And President Obama said, "We believe our diversity, when combined together by a common set of ideals, makes us stronger, makes us more creative." And immigrants don't really steal jobs. Many believe that immigrants take job opportunities away from US-born Americans, but immigrants actually help in creating jobs. 40% of Fortune 500 companies were started by immigrants or their children. And while they represent only 13% of the population, 25% of businesses are founded by immigrants. Immigrants also do the jobs no one else wants to do. For example, in 2011, the strawberry picking season in North Carolina opened 6,500 jobs for US-born Americans. Barely 268 Americans applied, and hardly half of them turned up for the first day. Just 7 Americans finished the season. And if it was not for hardworking immigrants, the entire industry would have collapsed, and we would have had to import our strawberries and pay double the price. Immigrants are also some of the bravest and the brightest visionaries in American history. Albert Einstein from Germany changed the face of science for the world. Ayn Rand, a Russian novelist, gave us the masterpiece, The Fountainhead. Computer scientist and entrepreneur Sergey Brin co-founded Google. Do Wan Chang founded Forever 21. Pierre Omidyar, an Iranian American, founded eBay. Madeleine Albright became the first female to be the Secretary of State. Rihanna became the superstar. From baseball players to astronauts to renowned musicians like Carlos Santana, who crossed the border illegally at the age of 8, immigrants are the visionaries. Immigrants are the agricultural workers. And immigrants are everyone in between, be the doctors, the engineers, the lawyers, the bodega owners, nurses, and nannies. Immigrants, with their hard work, bravery, and commitment, are essential to the fabric of the nation. So why do we blame immigrants so much? Why do human beings blame at the first place? We explored that with psychology of blaming. Through the stages of evolution, human beings have been concerned primarily of two things: survival and genetic propagation. Our ancestors lived in tribes and were drawn to people who were similar to them because that was the guarantee of survival. Anything outside of the core intimate group meant the threat of death, the threat of the other. As modern society became more sophisticated, we widened our circle of trust and tribe. And we believed we were more similar than different, and we were less threatening than we assume people to be. However, in moments of crisis, our primitive psyche kicks in, and we become threatened of people who even look or behave differently than us. To get this concept clearer, we also spoke to a psychologist, and he told us when something difficult needs to be done to address a problem, blaming helps us decide who is going to do the most of what's difficult. And the answer is almost never me or us, almost never. With the increasing influx of immigration, US-born Americans are feeling a stress on their resources. And this push and pull makes immigrants seem like the threat, the other, and we blame them for our hardships. The human motivation behind blaming is that of power and control. This has been the guiding principle for politics, and politicians have leveraged on this time and again, be it Herbert Hoover, Lyndon Johnson, Ronald Reagan, or even Barack Obama. Politicians have played immigration for their gains, and every time they did this, immigration got painted and consequently tainted. However, what remained constant was that immigration, whether it was painted good or bad, threat or opportunity, with their commitment, persistence, bravery, they contributed to the American culture and American economy to make US the superpower we now know it to be. Immigration is not the problem of the American dream. And it is imperative that we now take it off the political agenda. We must not allow politicians to influence or write narratives of fear between Americans and immigrants, playing us against each other. It's time we stop blaming immigrants for our troubles, and we start seeing them as allies in reviving the American dream. It is time we stop seeing immigrants as the other and just see them as another.
So how do we possibly can do this? How can we inspire people to see the other as another? To answer this question, we believe we have addressed two main steps. First, we would like to inspire all Americans to recognize their immigrant heritage. And second, we would like to inspire all immigrants to be proud of who they are. And this story is not necessarily about 43 million people who are counted as immigrants in this country. It is about anyone who believes in the unique cultural identity of this country. In the simple yet revolutionary ideas of the Enlightenment, all people are created equal, regardless of their gender, of their skin color, or who they love. These ideas, which are still dangerous in many countries, are not just words written on a page. Those are lived stories by the many. The ideas of life, which for Rosario's parents meant fleeing Nicaragua to escape the civil war. The ideas of liberty, which for Benjamin's grandmother meant leaving Austria for freer society, and pursuit of happiness, which for Fabian's grandfather meant leaving Ecuador to find better opportunities for his children, regardless the obstacles. They were all very brave people, and it all paid out. And right now, those people who not just learned, but experienced the true American values are seen as the other. So how can we, to shift the misperception of immigrants of being seen as, yes, criminals, terrorists, rapists, job stealers, to what they, well, to what we actually are? Multifaceted, essential Americans. Why multifaceted? The more people with more diverse background come to this country, the more economy enriches with new and different and innovative ideas. Essential because immigrants have always been in avant-garde of American economy, and Americans, because immigrants, same as the US-born Americans, do not just believe but lived the true American values. And we are here to introduce this concept, the United People of America. We would like to talk more about this. We would like to say that this organization, this nonprofit, is an organization to unite people beyond their political beliefs, regardless if they're Republicans, Democrats, if they hate everyone and they vote for Green Party. We would like people, well, maybe not. They would like people to make sure that we are united beyond the same simple idea. Why united? Because when we are united, we can come together and to face the threat of global security more effectively. When we are united, we can create economic opportunities for all. And when we are united, we can create something which hasn't been envisioned before. And we understand the history of immigration in the US is very controversial. And our call for unity is not to diminish any of those marginalized stories, but it is to emphasize them and to start talking about this. Our call for unity is to celebrate that America, unlike any other country in the world, has offered the others to join the country, to come together and to create the brighter future. In order to activate this mission, we would like to take 3 main steps. Step number 1, our advertising campaign. We would like to raise awareness that all Americans come from immigrant heritage. Step number 2, we would like to partner with like-minded businesses to embrace and to share our message further. And step number 3, we would like to create a social movement which can help people to be the part of this. And I'm going to walk you through step number 1. Meet our campaign. 100% American. 100% American is a campaign which emphasizes cultural and multicultural background of all Americans in the country. And here's Dave. Dave is 50% French, 30% Iranian, 20% charming, yet 100% American. We envisioned this campaign in all major cities in the US. We would like to place this advertising in airports, in bus stations, and in stadiums. In airports to welcome new people, in buses and in bus stations to be present in local communities, and in stadiums to get a wider reach. And here's Helen. Helen is 50% Russian, 40% German, 10% hipster, no one is perfect, yet 100% American. We envisioned this campaign featuring not just people, but also buildings and cultural icons, which were created by immigrants to celebrate this idea. And meet this lady, Lady Liberty. Lady Liberty is 90% French, 10% awesome, yet 100% American. And if you think that hot dog is a true iconic American dish, you are right. You're 100% right. And it is created by 2 German immigrants in Coney Island. So meet hot dog. Hot dog is 50% German, 40% delicious, and 10% funny. and 100% American. And how we are going to afford all these initiatives? Now we're going to work for our stage number 2.
How are we actually going to complete all these activations? Well, we have an idea, and it's called Project United. But what is actually Project United? Project United is actually a brand partnership or a brand collaboration initiative that will allow us to send or spread our message, that will allow us to spread our ideals, which are that all Americans are immigrants. And how would we do this actually? How we would do it is that we would show how some of the most iconic American brands were actually created or originated by immigrants. And what would we do with all these brands, or how would we collaborate with them? Well, we design products that would help fund our nonprofit organization to keep sharing the stories of amazing immigrants and all the positive things that immigrants have actually done for the country, how essential they have been in the country, and how they have made the country grow ever since the beginning of time. The first brand that we'd like to work with or partner with is Levi's. Levi's was founded in 1853 by Levi Strauss, who was an American entrepreneur but of German immigrant descent. The iconic brand could design products that would partner or work with our pattern, the flag that you saw before, and the brand would actually show show to its customers, to its people, that they could wear this pattern or these products as a brand of honor or as a badge of bravery. The second brand that we would like to speak about or partner with would be Apple. Apple was founded in 1975 by, of course, Steve Jobs, the visionary American CEO. And the reason why we'd like to partner with them is because the iPhone is the best-selling product, so all the accessories, all the products that we would design, like iPhone cases, would be literally in the hands of iPhone consumers. The third brand that we would like to partner with would be Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola was also founded by an American entrepreneur in 1886 by John Pemberton. He basically was of an American but of English descent, and we know that the company has now become the most perfect or most consumed soft drink in this nation. Finally, a company like McDonald's would actually help us spread our message to as many small towns or even bigger cities across the United States. Our visual identity and our message would make its way to everyone in the country. And for our limited edition products would be available on our website, where at unitedpeopleofamerica.org. And this website will actually push us on to the next step, which is a movement that we like to call We the Brave. Now, what is We the Brave movement? We the Brave movement will actually be a social movement that would inspire people to acknowledge where they came from. Basically, as you've seen throughout our presentation, we've shown you just how essential immigrants have been throughout its history. From the moment that the first settlers arrived to what is now the United States, to the Chinese who helped build the railroads, to the Eastern Europeans who helped build our cities, have been brave. They were brave people. We are brave people. You all are brave people. We've all taken into new risks. We've taken into new endeavors. We open up new businesses. We do whatever it takes to make sure that our families have better opportunities, economic opportunities for their future and for ourselves. We have been the heartbeat of this country in its past, its present, and definitely its future. So what would this march be about? The march would be singly, more importantly, about one particular thing, and that is the bravery that all these immigrants come with for the first time. Imagine coming to a country where you may not know the language at first or how the society or their culture works, but you have to somehow figure it out how you would survive in this country. With nationwide marches, we would basically try to open up marches in the biggest major cities, but these marches would also be replicated in smaller towns. And they would actually start on October 17, 2017 of this year. they would be a yearly held event, a yearly held march that will inspire immigrants to be proud of who they are, of their brave spirit. And for older generation Americans or for older immigrants who have been here for longer generations, is to remind them of their ancestors and where they have come from. Through our products for We the Brave, of course, there will be hats, posters, flags, and definitely t-shirts. And where could you get them? Well, you would get them from a advocacy toolkit, which you would be able to order online to create your own grassroots movement in your own small town or in your big city, whichever you are living in. And this toolkit will actually be available to be ordered through our website, which is unitedpeopleofamerica.org. But it's not we're not ending there. Because social media is so powerful, we definitely have to reach out to everyone through Twitter or Instagram, and the way that people would be able to find out or learn a little bit more about how the march is going or the new events would be through hashtag We the Brave or hashtag All American. And now, it's probably the best way to encapsulate the spirit that we've been trying to say through our entire presentation, that immigrants have always been the backbone and the heartbeat of the country. So what better way to express that to you guys on a video? Thank you. We the brave built the railroads. We've built the highways. We've built New York City, Chicago, and San Francisco. We've risked our lives to find better opportunities for our children. We've learned new languages and have been strangers in a new world. We the brave work for our food. Tomatoes, apples, and peaches. We work with all people, with our friends and our families. We've founded Ford, Chobani, Google, and Tesla. We create new flavors and tastes. We enrich music, the arts, and culture. We fight for the dream. We protect and envision a better future for all. We the brave have been the heartbeat of America's past. We are the pulse of America's present, and we have the spirit that will propel us into a better future. We are American. We are immigrants. We are the brave.
Do it makes us harder, better, faster, stronger. More than power, never. Ever after work is over. Work it, make it, do it, makes us
In 1776, Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. But it wasn't until 1931 that James Truslow Adams wrote the first iteration of the American dream, and in it that life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with an opportunity for each to thrive. And this early thriving came when humans began to harness the power of fire to cook, to stay warm, to fend off predators, and even to connect with each other socially. Ultimately, this was an early example of technology, which is the energy used in order to solve a problem. And as Buckminster Fuller points out, this energy is not just a physical manifestation, but the energy is also a mental manifestation. It really has the capability to change the way that we think. Ultimately, tools such as stone tools, the wheel, and the Winchester rifle have enabled Americans to branch out, pushing far past their colonial roots and into completely uncharted territory. Pivotal innovations that have really begun to shape America's history have connected us as a nation and have joined us together under a common ethos.
We're going to start after the Civil War, which was a point in American history where it went from a number of disparate states to more of a unified country. In 1862, the Pacific Railroad Act was signed by Abraham Lincoln, and this was to support the building of a transcontinental railroad for the very first time, which was completed in 1869 when Union Pacific and Central Pacific connected their tracks. This was the very first time in US history where transcontinental travel was made possible. Over the next 30 years, this was really a time of overbuilding and more westward expansion, that by 1893, there were a total of 7 transcontinental railroads connecting America from coast to coast. This made travel that much more accessible and much more cheaper. So now that humans had mastered mobility, So now that humans had mastered large distances, they had true mobility. And with that, came an expansion of their mental geography and their horizons. And with this increased mobility, people interacted with a wider range of different types of people. And this significantly changed the way we communicated and how we viewed one another. The railroad also allowed businesses and farmers to extend their reach much farther than they could have before through the movements of goods and foods quicker and cheaper. Alexander Graham Bell was a human speech expert who was working towards transmitting speech telegraphically, which he succeeded to do in 1876 with the invention of the telephone. This drastically changed the way we communicated, making it more effective by transcending the limitations of time and space. Despite this, it took time for it to become adopted on a mass scale, simply because the very first models were difficult to use. But by 1907, it became a huge network, a large network comprising of almost 6 million by 1907 around the country. However, it did take longer for it to reach rural areas simply because infrastructure and wires had to be built. But as telephone networks grew, it made the world much smaller through quicker and clearer communication. While there were many inventors who were working towards creating a viable electric light, it was Thomas Edison who was responsible for creating the first commercially viable electric light bulb in 1879. This created a brighter, stronger, and cleaner light source than the alternatives at the time. And Edison further commercialized his electric light bulb by founding the very first power plant in 1882, Pearl Street Station, which was located in Lower Manhattan. Given that this light source was so much brighter, people were no longer dictated by the light and dark hours of the day. They could become more productive. Despite the revolutionary effects of electrification on society and living standards, it took almost 50 years to reach urban homes, and even longer to reach rural areas. And so this slow diffusion of both the electrification network as well as the telephone network grew the divide in living standards between urban and rural America, which is something that we still see in our society today. But when power lines were finally reached to this Tennessee farmer in 1930s, he said, "The greatest thing on earth is to have the love of God in your heart, and the next greatest is to have electricity in your house." Although the automobile was invented in 1886, it took time to become the main mode of transportation in America simply because, the first models that were sold in the US were priced at $12,450 in 1901. This was an era when the average annual income was less than $1,000. So when Ford's Model T arrived in 1908, priced at $950, it made the automobile much more accessible to almost everyone in America. And Ford's low prices were made possible through his moving assembly line, which made mass manufacturing a reality. After this, the adoption rate of automobiles was so rapid that in a 10-year time span, the number of registered cars in the US went from less than 500,000 in 1910 to almost 9 million in 1920. And this significant change led to a focus on paving more roads, which physically changed the landscape. With the automobile came a true sense of freedom of mobility that people hadn't experienced before, and this enabled large-scale migration from rural to urban America. During World War I, people were faced with the destructive powers that technology could have. But as America came out of the war, it went from being a country to a nationality. The first remarkable invention that came after the war was that of the radio. Wireless telegraphy, which is the basis of radio, was invented by Marconi in 1896. However, a series of additional inventions had to be made before it could become commercially viable. And in 1920, the first radio station sent out the very first commercial broadcast.
This is KDKA of the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company in East Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We shall now broadcast the election returns. We'd appreciate it if anyone hearing this broadcast would communicate with us, as we are very anxious to know how far the broadcast is reaching and how it is being received.
After this, radio spread like wildfire. It was one of the inventions that were most quickly adopted in the US, reaching almost 100% of households in less than 30 years. And this was because at $20 a radio, families had access to news, entertainment, music, and advertising all in one. And radio's capabilities were so highly regarded that it was found in the Great Depression that Americans would rather sell their refrigerators, their bathtubs, their telephones, and their beds to make rent payments than to part with the radio box that connected them to the world. And given that radio was the very first mass medium, it had the first mass audience. And with that came a collective desire, a common culture, and ultimately a collective American dream. During World War II, technologies were even more destructive and catastrophic than people could have imagined. But as America came out of the war victorious, it went from the sense of national identity became an ethos. Although the very first all-electric television prototype was unveiled in 1938, it wasn't until the 1950s that television's moment had come. And as television national networks grew, it united the population under a new window on the world. And television saw the fastest diffusion rate of any invention, appliance, or device in US history, faster than the radio, and even faster than the smartphone. And this is why.
Hello there, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and children.
What do you think of television, honestly? Do you think it's good?
Yes, I do. I think particularly for what it is, for the amount of hours that it gives you for enjoyment, either in education or for pure entertainment, it's remarkably good.
What television did in the 60s was to show the American people to the American people. Until then, we did not truly know much about each other. We knew only what we had seen, which was very little, and what we had read, which was even less.
A few years ago, I thought it was the end of the world.
No, it's just the beginning. I think people looked at television for answers, maybe, that the world's just confusing. It's going to hell all over the place. Maybe something on here will help.
There was no denying the shift in attitudes towards sex, towards race relations, towards politics. It was all televised.
That you will faithfully execute the office.
That I will faithfully execute the office. When it works, television conveys impressions and evokes memories. When it works well, television makes us feel.
Good morning.
It's T minus 1 hour, 29 minutes, and 53 seconds and counting.
Television created a sense of national unity around cultural events.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
You could turn on a machine and be somewhere else.
You're looking good here.
Television changed absolutely everything.
Beautiful view.
Since the 1950s, America has continued to sharpen her innovative skills, competing in the space race and putting a man on the moon in 1969. In 1973, we developed the first mobile telephone, and in 1983, we created the internet. In the year 2003, we collaborated to map the world's first human genome, and today, we have created cars that can drive themselves. So in considering some of our pivotal technologies, such as the telephone, the television, and the electric light, all of these have really brought Americans together and networked us under one dream. Considering our rich technological heritage, we're left to wonder, why is it that we can't fully embrace technology?
Describe for me, as vividly as you can, what it is you're worried about, what it is that the nightmare scenario looks like.
What can we do to protect ourselves from robot automation?
The CEO explained that machines will replace traditional labor.
This is all about artificial intelligence and how much faster.
This week, it's not cowboys versus aliens, it's humans versus robots.
And a warning from Tesla Motors CEO Elon Musk. It has nothing to do with cars. Instead, Musk warns about artificial intelligence, which he has called more dangerous than nuclear weapons. Musk spoke at a symposium at MIT.
I mean, with artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon.
Theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking, whom I'm sure you know, warned this week that technology could end up ending humanity.
We have to find ways to create jobs, and everybody in this room, everybody watching, the industries that you're working in are going to downsize because of technology.
We have been conditioned by popular culture and the media to fear technology. And from our research, we have found that this fear is real. We conducted surveys to find out exactly how people feel about technology and their future, and this is what we heard back. Jacqueline, 21, says, "I don't trust technology. Everything will soon be controlled by it, and that's a scary thought." And Kimberly, 51, says, we're going to turn into machines. But this fear of technology is nothing new. When the Stockton-Darlington Railway first appeared in 1825, people thought that the 35-mile-an-hour forward speed was going to melt our bodies. So why do we fear technology? We fear technology because we fear the unknown. And our fear is biological. We fear technology for the same reason we fear the dark, is because we cannot see what is coming before us. And we don't completely understand how it works. Its complexity gives us anxiety. And for that, we feel that we don't have complete control, and that's very unsettling. And we fear our dependence on technology. In the weeks running up to Y2K, we thought the world was going to end. We thought this was going to happen because of a computer bug. And the speed at which things are changing just exacerbates this fear. Things are getting faster and faster. We're overwhelmed. And with the advancements in artificial intelligence, it only makes things worse. As futurist Jared Lehner speculates that in 2023, the level of artificial intelligence will surpass human intelligence and will take off rapidly after that. And that's a very unsettling thought for a lot of people, because we think we're going to be controlled by machines. And the massive potential of artificial intelligence is so great that philosopher Nick Bostrom says that this may be the last invention we will ever have to make. And it's not just in the future where we're going to be, where we fear we're going to be taken over by machines. It's right now. We fear that jobs are being taken by robots. This is the Hadrian X. It is a machine designed by fast brick robotics in Australia, it can lay 1,000 bricks per hour, and that is a task that it would take 2 humans to do over an entire day. And there are many jobs at risk. Jobs with a high level of routine in their tasks are most susceptible to be taken over by technology. Jobs such as telemarketers, accountants, delivery drivers, salespeople. It's very daunting. But history has shown that technology has had positive effects. Because the purpose of automation is to take tedious, repetitive, and dangerous tasks, give them to machines so that humans can concentrate on more human-centered tasks. When ATMs first came on the scene in the 1970s, people were very fearful. They thought that the machines were going to eat their money, and also they feared the loss of jobs. But what really happened was the machines allowed the human tellers to concentrate on more sophisticated tasks like customer service. And we've seen this throughout history. Technology does not inherently reduce the number of jobs. It just creates new types of jobs. And we've seen this over and over again when our country shifted from agriculture into industry and from industry into digital. And this graph behind me shows that there is actually a gap right now of jobs that are out there and jobs that can be filled. And this is caused by a big lag in our education system. So when technology and humans come together and learn to work with each other, great things can happen. This is Yumi. It's the world's first collaborative robot. Multiplicity is a term that describes humans and technology working together in harmony to accelerate the rate of creation, problem solving, and learning. And right now, AI is helping us find new treatments for cancer, and this is amazing. The Cleveland Clinic is working with IBM Watson Genomic Analytics to match patient DNA data versus mountains of DNA data in order to find specific treatments. And as Rodney Brooks states, once we learn to co-work with robots, our tasks eventually become their tasks, and our new work will become something we can hardly imagine. So we believe that our continued embrace of technology will expand our opportunities for richer and more fulfilling experiences. And here are some things that are in development right now. These things are coming in the near future. This is Hyperloop. Hyperloop is a transportation system that can go 750 miles per hour. It operates using magnetic levitation that basically it builds an air cushion which eliminates friction. And right now, Google, Sony, and Samsung are all investing heavily in smart contact lens technology. Imagine getting the news, search results, driving directions, tweets from our president, all straight into your eyes. And there's a company in San Francisco called Emotive, which has made wireless headsets that scan your brain waves to control things. So you can play video games or even control your wheelchair with thoughts in your mind. And so we have to really, really remember that this is very important. Technology has the ability to deliver experiences beyond the confines of our imagination. And so we should not fear technology. Technology is amazing. If we fear technology, we hesitate. And if we hesitate, we can't move forward.
As we just saw, technology will enable us to get around quicker and even help us control objects with our mind, but technology can also help us solve the most pressing issues in our society. In America today, there's still people who don't have clean drinking water, but now engineers are coming up with ways of actually turning seawater into drinking water. And not only that, they also use the waves of the ocean to create electricity, which they then send back to local communities. Secondly, there's also places in this country where pollution is so bad that people get sick. The pictures here are, sorry, excuse me. The picture to your right is a picture from Bakersfield, California, a city with about 900,000 inhabitants. Well, over 100,000 of those people have diseases connected to pollution. But now architects are coming up with new ways of creating buildings. Stefano Boeri is now creating buildings that breathe oxygen. And the thing to your left is said to be done in 2018 in Nanjing, China. Lastly, there's almost 50 million Americans today who don't have food, which is pretty incredible to think about. But now companies are coming up with new ways of producing food that might make this a problem of the past. Freight Farms, a company located in Boston, have found a way to create as much food in a shipping container as you would usually take 2 acres of farmland to make. So with all of these things, they have something in common, and that's the fact that they're not run by the government. Behind them are people like you and I, people who believe that they can actually change the world, people who believe that they can do it faster than any government actually can. And they believe that they can do this because they've had the opportunity to explore, to see what is out there, to question why things are the way that they are. And now they're coming up with ways of doing things that might actually change our society forever. However, this is where the problem comes in, because in America today, we're not allowing people this opportunity. So why is that? It all comes down to a lack of access.
Today, there are large gulfs of unequal access to technology in America, and this becomes abundantly clear in the case of internet access, because whether you believe it or not, there are 23 million rural Americans today that cannot access the internet. And those that can are likely stuck with slow 1 megabit per second dial-up speeds.
At this point, you might be wondering, wait a minute, what exactly is a megabit? So a megabit is a unit of data, the speed of which is equivalent to miles per hour that you might travel in your car. So as Carter mentioned, millions of Americans today are still running on a 1 megabit per second internet connection, which is sort of like traveling down a road in a horse and buggy. It's not an ideal situation. Millions more Americans, the average American in fact, has an 18 megabit per second connection, which is very similar to driving down the internet superhighway in a 1908 Ford Model T. The average South Korean is much better off. With a 29 megabit per second connection, they're basically cruising in a Prius. But the lucky few who have a 900 megabit per second FiOS connection are moving at the equivalent of a Formula One race car. So as you can see, there's a wide gulf of disparity here, and America certainly isn't winning. And now back to our story.
America today is 10th in the world when it comes to internet speeds. And when you break this down on a state level, we've discovered that more than half of the US states are below the national average of 18.7 megabits per second, with states like New Mexico and Idaho having slower speeds than Slovakia and Trinidad. The map behind me now illustrates the discrepancies of internet subscriptions across America by county, where purple indicates low subscription rates. We identified that this tends to be the case in rural communities, primarily in the South. And this isn't going by completely unnoticed. House Representative of Georgia, Austin Scott, says that his communities need rural broadband access quite more so than roads and bridges now. And Dmitry Kanevsky says and believes that technology is supposed to be this great equalizer, this thing that's supposed to lift us all up. But this great equalizer seems to be conditional, because rural is only half the story. 24 million urban Americans don't have access to the internet either. And on top of that, another 48 million have inadequate slow speeds. So slow, in fact, the FCC doesn't even register their speeds as broadband. That means that 30% of America is improperly connected to the internet. That's 95 million Americans. So the problem isn't just geographic, it's economic too. Because a third of those without broadband say the reason is that they can't afford the options available to them for service. And another 10% say it's the cost of their hardware that's keeping them from participating. Now, here in New York, the average annual income is very high, and our access is very high as well. But the discrepancy between the haves and have-nots down in Alabama is quite a different story. In Shelby, it is a little bit like here. People have access and people make quite a lot of money. But in neighboring Bibb County, where residents make only half the amount of income, they pull in only half the amount of internet access. And in Bibb and counties like it across America, this has real ramifications. Miss Johnson, a rural resident of Missouri, Miss Johnson, a rural resident of Missouri, pays $170 a month for inadequate speeds, too slow for her to upload a simple photo. Now, if you can't upload a photo, how can you possibly run a business? In fact, Miss Johnson has to drive 4 miles every day to one particular gas station that has Wi-Fi speeds quick enough for her to reach out to her clients. Now, if you have inadequate speeds, we all know what it's like when technology doesn't work for you. It's incredibly frustrating. But imagine if you were entirely reliant upon the connection here on the right. If you can't load a photo and you can't send an email, how could you possibly run that business? And of course, this doesn't just affect adults and businesses. It affects kids and their education too. 13-year-old David Bardole says that he feels like he's being less prepared for his future than other kids with better access to technology are. And the unfortunate thing is that he's not wrong. Pew Studies articulates that lacking broadband at home is a major disadvantage to learning new things. And over 2/3 of Americans agree that having slow internet leads to a lack of finding a new job. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspects of these stories is that Americans like Miss Johnson and David Bardole are becoming despondent because they feel like they're not worth it anymore. But America is supposed to be the land of opportunity, the place where you and me, anyone can make something of themselves for themselves and their family. But as time progresses and we become increasingly technologically reliant, America is beginning to fail on those promises, and America is emerging as a technologically divided country.
And as we're failing on our promises, other countries are advancing at great pace. And one of those countries is Estonia. Estonia is a small country in the Baltics, just about 1.3 million people. That's just under 1/6 of the size of New York City. And up until 1991, they were under the rule of the Soviet Union. They then became independent and they had to start building a nation from scratch. So they decided to embrace technology. And within 7 years, all the schools in the country was online. The prime minister was criticized, but he believed that every kid should have a computer because the blend of computers and a child's curiosity was bound to create something special. 2 years later, he took this one step further and he declared that internet access should be a human right. So if you go to Estonia today, you will be automatically logged on to the national web. And then they started building this system that worked for the people. So they made it incredibly easy for people to set up businesses, to chase their dreams. And with all of these initiatives and more, things started happening. And suddenly ideas popped up and companies. And out of this came their first major technological success, which was Skype. And the fact that Skype could come from a country that only 12 years earlier didn't even have anything changed the whole mindset of everybody from that country. They went from being something of an underdog to unlimited potential. And today, their embrace of technology has completely transformed their entire economy. And now they're being talked about as the most technologically advanced country in the world. So national pride, it's pretty incredible to think about the fact that here in America, we don't even value it high enough to give 95 million people basic internet access. And it's pretty incredible to think about the fact that 30% of those claim they don't even want it. And according to a Pew Research study, they said that they don't want it because it doesn't have any relevance to them. They are just not interested. They think it's a waste of time. They're just too busy for the internet, and they just don't need it. So apparently that's why. But being too busy and just not needing the internet is sort of like saying that you don't really need electricity in 1935. It took us 50 years to electrify this country, but FDR believed that everyone should have it. And by 1954, 90% of rural America did. And once they did, they began to see it as a basic necessity. And today we couldn't imagine living without it. So if that's the case, why are we leaving some in the dark?
This is how nearly 50 million Americans feel today, completely cut off. It's like we've left a massive part of the country completely off the map, while the rest of us thrive and flourish. But today, in America, we believe that we
Let there be lights.
uphold. Great. So, we here in America claim to uphold the ethos of equality. The Declaration of Independence claims that all men are created equal and that everyone should have the equal opportunity to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. But in truth, we've never treated our people equally. And in fact, there has always been blatant discrimination. But the Declaration says something else too. It says that when there's something in our way, it's for the people to solve. It's for the people to demand. And it's for the people to make real, meaningful change.
Today, we live in a technologically divided country, but we are all one people who coexist within a technological ecosystem that not only comprises of us, but it also includes opportunities, ideas, and technology. And when a piece of the system becomes deactivated, the remainder withers away. And today, millions of Americans are left without access to the technological ecosystem. But technology breeds our collective prosperity, and it enables us to see things that we could not have even dreamed of only a few years ago. Yesterday, technology brought us to the moon, and today we explore the surface of Mars. These technological connections breed magic, and simple tasks can be transformed from the impossible things that we'd never dreamed of only a few years ago. Ultimately, we need everyone to be included within the technological ecosystem, and we need to make it clear to everyone that technology has an immense power and potential for all of our lives. For our fellow Americans, we need to demand both access and information. And with this, we would like to introduce Technobloom, a movement that demands complete and equal internet access for every Americans. The goal of the movement is to get 100% of America to a high-speed 100 megabit per second connection. And ultimately, our movement is driven by two tenets. The first, we seek to embrace technology as a natural result of our human growth. And the second, we will recognize technology as an imperative to our national evolution. We also need to overcome two societal problems. The first being a lack of understanding surrounding the capability of technology and a lack of access based on economic prosperity. And now we'll address solutions to both problems.
So we would kickstart this awareness by making sure that everyone in America is aware of the discrepancy of access. We begin by the blackout. So imagine you're on Google, you're looking up a recipe or directions for where you want to go. And this happens. Excuse me. You have no access to Google. Not for 2 minutes, not for an hour, but for an entire day. No access. Once the day is done, a message welcoming you back to Google appears. Lucky for you, you have access, but for the 95 millions of Americans who go disconnected, they aren't as fortunate as we are. In addition to the blackout, Technobloom would also release a social media campaign on Snapchat and Instagram, featuring stories much like Miss Johnson that Carter mentioned before, and how technology and not having access has affected their lives and their businesses. If people also want to rally behind this cause, they are welcome to change their Facebook display photo with the solidarity sticker of the Technobloom logo. Now that everyone has access, how do we activate this? By making sure that every person in America has access to internet. Technobloom would deliver 95 million hotspot devices, called Bloom Spots, to those who have little to no access. The recipients of these packages would be determined by US Census data, and we propose to partner with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for funding. And for those that don't have laptops, we propose to partner with one laptop per child to ensure everyone has computers and access to the internet. Now, you may be wondering, with this device, what can this do? Well, it unlocks the portal to the future, introducing the TechnoBloom portal. Now, this portal is a website. It's basically Google on steroids, where you can access many different things. The first section is an internet section for beginners. So for those that aren't familiar with internet terms, or really what the internet can do for them, this goes through different glossary of terms and gets them more comfortable in this new technological realm that they are first experiencing. In addition to that, there is a great discrepancy of education within America, and we feel that by partnering with CK12, a foundation that we have had the privilege of working with during the program here at SVA, we think that every child deserves to have high-quality education. And this is an online platform available for free for students K through 12 with a STEM curriculum. Now, everyone needs to be aware of how people are getting access. And this countdown clock will show people how many people are getting access to TechnoBloom. And the goal is to get the countdown down to 0. Now, if you want to know what's happening in your neighbor's backyard, you don't have to look over the fence to see what kind of access they have. Instead, you can find the section on the portal and learn about the different discrepancies in access depending on which state you're in. And we're hoping that once people realize what internet service provider their neighbors have, the difference in cost and speed, this will enrage people and get them very upset so that they can contact their representatives and make change. So TechnoBloom will have a form that everyone in America can fill out to demand that their representative in their district ensures that everyone in America has 100 megabit per second broadband speed. Now, how do we get people actually excited about this? We propose TechnoBloom invites people to have a day off. No screens, no cell phones, no laptops, no social media. And we invite people to participate on August the 6th, which is the first day that the World Wide Web was made available to everyone in 1991. Because we want people to be aware of what it's like to be disconnected and how it can affect America's progress, because internet is a basic human right for everyone.
We need to recognize technology as a natural extension of humanity. We must champion experimentation as the portal to discovery. We need to harness our collective ingenuity, and we need to allow everyone the opportunity to shoot for the moon.
Internet is my basic human right.
Internet is my basic human right.
Internet is my basic right.
Internet is my basic human right.
Internet is my basic human right.
Internet is everyone's basic human right. Thank you very much.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
All right, let's kick off the final thesis presentation of the day. We know you've been sitting down for a long time. We appreciate you still being here. We're going to warm you up with a big question, or a big statement rather. The world in itself offers no intrinsic meaning.
Thank you, Freddie. The meaning of life is a construct created by humans. For some of us, it's enough to just experience the world as it is. So we tend to put these constructs into place. These constructs give us the sense of meaning or purpose.
And some of these constructs turn into laws, in which we are expected to exist. But the difference between these laws and the physical laws that run our universe is that they are created by us, humans, and while some of them are optional, like choosing not to eat pork, others enforce segregation and denies us the right to marry who we love.
And Freddie, did you know that in Arizona, it's illegal for a donkey to fall asleep in a bathtub?
I did not.
Okay, so I got another one. Did you know that in Alabama, it's also illegal to wear a fake mustache in church because it causes too much laughter?
I had no idea. But what I do know is that as humans, for better or worse, we find meaning only in the values, symbols, and behaviors that we agree to assign value to. And in this country, the values that founded us were these: life, which is binary, our right to live and die, our liberty, which lives within the confines of the law, and finally, the most open-ended and abstract of them all, the pursuit of happiness.
And the pursuit of happiness, while it was unique, it was also radical and completely unheard of. There were 56 men that signed this bill. They were farmers, merchants, and plantation owners. And these men had everything to lose and nothing to gain, except for maybe one thing, which was a country of their own. So they did risk everything. They became rebels and traitors, and they were to be hanged by King George. But the immigrants that also flocked to our shores also risked everything. They were escaping religious persecution and societal constraints. And so while this was a radical and completely disruptive idea, the pursuit of happiness captured the imagination and the minds of millions for over 240 years.
And since then, it has been these collective and individual pursuits that have led us to harness the power of nation. It brought light to our homes, cities, and factories. It connected masses of lands, and it unified a nation through the radio waves. These pursuits became the societal glue that built this nation.
But the years that followed were some of the longest, darkest, and most hopeless times in America. The Great Depression that obliterated hope caused millions to struggle because they wanted to escape from the cauldron of this crisis. Half of all American families did not have a job, and they were struggling. But amidst these darkest and most discouraging days, James Truslow Adams saw a glimmer of hope, and he wrote about a particular dream. It was not an ideal one, but it was a dream where life should be richer, better, and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. And in 1931, the American dream was coined. He described the dream not of motor cars nor high wages, but wait. That same year, Neil McElroy of Procter & Gamble invented brand management, and it was this discipline that managed the business of motor cars. And many, many more design, advertising agencies, and publications that focused on photojournalism appeared. Advertising shifted away from functional product attributes and on to social enhancements, often showing a detailed vignette of a social life and becoming consumers' coaches instead. Imagery became the most valuable tool in commerce. And this is reinforced by the picture superiority effect, because it's our human condition to remember images more than words. It's saying that in 3 days, all of you are more likely, 65% more likely, to remember the images that we are showing you, and only likely to remember 10% of what is coming out of our mouths. Throughout the years, media, advertising, and PR portrayed the American dream through augmented fantasies rather than social realities. And this was not only to adults, but to children as well, as they were socialized into the construct by the books that they read. Americans were continually sold a new visual landscape that paraded as the shortcut to happiness. And soon, we began to lose our ability to define our own version of the American dream.
And work was the enabler of the American dream. If you were willing to work hard and play by the rules, the rest of the dream would follow. America defined itself by a collective dream, a dream of economic opportunity and upward mobility. There was honor in work, dignity in providing for your family. And initially, it was just about doing and surviving. But as our basic needs were met, we started to see a shift. People started contemplating their happiness, and for the first time, they actually had the time to pursue it. We see an example of this in The Great Gatsby, a tale of a man who works hard to pursue the American dream. But for him, the dream soon becomes an obsession with wealth, excess, and decadence. In Arthur Miller's play, Death of a Salesman, we see another man, Willie Loman, desperately seeking his version of the American dream. And his desire for fame and recognition and success leads to a tragic ending. Life was rotten on the outside, but also started to rot from within. We started to see that hard work moved away from being about honor and shifted to become about achieving success. And we believed success would bring us happiness. And as you saw earlier, our good friend here, Gordon Gekko, greed is good. Work and success became a disease, and for many, an addiction. Our self-image became measured by how much money we made compared to others. All these images that you're seeing here before you became the new prescription for success and the next shortcut to happiness. Success had perverted the American dream. So much so that the very definition of success froze in time, that if you looked up success in the dictionary today, you will see a definition that success means the achievement of wealth, respect, or fame. The new construct of the American dream.
And as Hilal mentioned earlier, we thought hard work would lead to success, and success would bring us happiness. But was this really true for everyone? Well, the American dream was possible, but not for everyone. In 1776, the Founding Fathers' revolutionary rhetoric excluded the African American slaves from life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it was the Native American genocide that led to the birth of this nation. Slavery was a source of power and riches. This nation's prosperity was built on unpaid labor. Since then, there's always existed a paradox of freedom in this nation. Even in the 50s and 60s, while white Americans were pursuing the dream, African Americans were fighting to sit at the same table. Women uprose to fight to be treated as equals. The gay community fought for their right to love. So was the American dream for every American?
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
Was it just me, or did this ad have only white Americans? So the American dream that stood for hard work, success, and happiness was a divisive construct. It was a dream that everyone bought into, but it was only accessible to the white Americans who could afford it. However, in the 80s and 90s, the government crafted a way for all Americans to be the part of the dream. And like we heard earlier from Capitalism, the government changed lending policies and allowed a shortcut to buy and borrow into happiness. And then we see that credit card debt are on a rise. Student loan is on a rise. Outstanding mortgages are on a rise. Buying the American dream led to a debt of about $10.2 trillion. That's the equivalent of the GDP of France, Germany, UK, and Canada. So while Americans were buying the shortcut to happiness, the government was in fact selling them debt. We were living an illusion of the dream because one of the most overt symbols of what the dream came to represent was ripped away during the housing crash in 2008. Americans lost their jobs and the hope to send their kids to college. The trust in the system came crashing down. So was freedom really freedom, or were we imprisoned by the prescription of the American dream?
After the housing crisis, our nation entered the recession, and at the same time, it entered a state of depression. After 2009, we saw a drastic increase in the cases of anxiety and depression. And at the same time, we saw another increase in the suicide rate. Between the years of 2008 and 2010, this rate increased by 4 times. Once again, we were a nation that was yearning for a better tomorrow. And what happened was we began to see a new industry starting to emerge. This industry was capitalizing on our despair. This industry was happiness. Crazy, I know. As a nation, we are obsessed with finding the next shortcut to happiness. However, the more that we chase after our happiness as an end goal, the less happy we actually become. And the reason for this is because we forget to understand that happiness is a fleeting emotion. It is a construct that we apply our own meaning to. And as humans, we are innately wired to want to secure happiness and hold on to it, but this is actually emotionally impossible to do. So what happened when we started buying into the happiness industry and chasing happiness was that we were deprived of our hope. Hope is one of our most underestimated emotions. It drives our self-agency and our determination in achieving our goals. When we practice hope, we also practice our pursuit. And so when we're practicing hope and pursuing, happiness then becomes a byproduct of our pursuits instead of a desired end goal. And so really, our inalienable right of the pursuit of happiness, well, it's a misnomer. It should be finding the happiness in pursuit. And it is through these pursuits that unites our nation together. But let's take a moment and think about how our nation is pursuing our happiness today. Much like the American dream, where we were lulled into virtual realities and augmented fantasies, yet again today, propelled by the happiness industry, we have fallen to another virtual reality, this time of eternal happiness. This next clip we are about to show you is a very powerful representation of the virtual reality we are living today.
We now augment and broadcast our own virtual reality of happiness. But this virtual reality is not in line with the promise of our founding fathers, who had the hope of collective and individual pursuits will build a nation. So in order to recast the American dream and have a lasting chance at our pursuit of happiness, we propose the American reality. Because in reality, we find purpose. And in pursuit, we find our happiness. But wait, 43 million Americans today still live below the poverty line, which is set today at a national average, meaning that you have less than $12,000 of annual income, while a third of Americans say that they would have a hard time facing a $400 emergency expense. 50% of our low-wage workers still go without any paid vacation leave. All this in a nation where 62% of our jobs are threatened due to automation. So how, in the land of opportunity, are we supposed to pursue anything when our fundamental needs goes unsatisfied? And why, in a land of 80, that's right, 80 government-funded benefit programs, also known as entitlement programs such as Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, are people still struggling for their basic needs?
So, there's a gorilla in the room. 153 million people are living on these entitlement programs. Programs such as Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, amongst others. But these programs aren't making anyone better off. In fact, they're de-incentivizing people to want to go back to work, because the idea of going back to work means maybe making less money than you would actually be making on your entitlements. And why is it that if these are not making any of us better off, is our government and we as taxpayers paying $2.7 trillion a year? So this is a lose-lose proposition with no gain and no end in sight. This is why by 2034, Social Security reserves will begin to deplete. And if that's not bad enough, our government now is negotiating a new health care bill that will start to roll back Medicaid entitlements for families living below the poverty line. This is not okay. We need a new system. And in our American reality, we see a system that looks out for everyone and not just some. But this system, there have been talks of this brewing for centuries. And from people such as Thomas Paine to Martin Luther King Jr. to Richard Nixon, they all believed in a system that did look out for everyone and not just a few. And they believed that our nation could not move forward until we did so. And today, we also see this popping up in the news from conservative journalists in the Wall Street Journal, Charles Murray, to Elon Musk. They are also talking about a system that could make this better. And this system is the universal basic income. And the universal basic income is where every American has the right to live above the poverty level.
So how will this work? Every American aged 21 years and older will be eligible for a monthly payment that will amount to an annual sum of $13,000, with a portion mandated for health insurance. While this is enough to satisfy your most fundamental needs, you will still need to work. As Freddie had mentioned earlier on, the poverty line in America sits at $12,000 today. So with universal basic income at $13,000, this will able to lift every single American above the poverty line. Since it's a nation's job to take care of its people, then universal basic income can make this happen. This is also important for our pursuits of happiness, because according to the theory of human motivation of Maslow's hierarchy, unless we have our most fundamental and basic needs met, we will not be physically nor mentally available to pursue our pursuits of happiness. So universal basic income can pave and can enable our pursuits of happiness. So now that we have understood what universal basic income is and how it exactly works, let's get back to that sum of money. The sum of money that is set aside for entitlement programs in 2016 by the federal government. Hannah, how much was it again?
2.7 trillion.
Okay, so if you're wondering where the money will come from for universal basic income, it is actually already there. Universal basic income will replace the entitlement programs today, such as Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, amongst others. But those who are in the audience 55 years and older, if you're thinking about your Social Security payouts, please don't worry, because there will be a 15-year phase-in period so that you will not be penalized for this transition. So let's look at some more comparison numbers. Just bear with me for a moment. Today, with the current system, a person's average Social Security payout is around $180,000. But you could have more than $260,000 with universal basic income. Hey, this is $70,000 more per individual. So this implementation will not only be beneficial for the individual, but also for the federal government. Because according to the Wall Street Journal, by 2020, this system will be $1 trillion cheaper than the current one. This, in fact, turns entitlements for some into investments in everyone. Those who don't need the money today can invest it and save it for your future. But those who do need the money today for their most fundamental needs can now take care of themselves. This implementation will then enable the pursuit of happiness for every American.
So I know what some of you are probably wondering in the room right now. This sounds like socialism, right? No. What universal basic income will do is will reimagine the new American reality. Many people are calling it Capitalism 2.0. And the reason for that is that universal basic income reduces government bureaucracy, it reduces dependency on entitlements, and it gives the individual the autonomy to decide what to do with their money and when. You're also probably wondering, how the heck is this going to get passed in a nation that is gridlocked and partisan? Universal basic income is not left. This is not right. This is forward. And if this program is so great, you're probably also wondering, well, why hasn't it been implemented yet? Well, two things. The first thing is that let's all agree, we have a bias and we think that handouts breeds laziness. But let me tell you the second thing that you may not know. This has actually been tried in 3 different places. For example, in Alaska. Alaska has independent universal basic income, and the results are quite impressive. Since the implementation of universal basic income, there's been a rise of 10,000 new jobs and an increase of personal income of $1.5 billion. In Canada, there was a decrease in hospitalization rates, and high school graduation rates surpassed 100%. How's that possible? Because kids who dropped out of high school actually went back into the system to graduate. And in Namibia, we saw a 42% decrease in crime and 29% increase in earned income. Universal basic income is needed now more than ever. As you heard from some of the groups earlier, and as you heard from Freddie, a lot of our jobs are threatened with the rise of automation. The world is changing. The economy used to rely on manufacturing and a labor-intensive workforce. Today, we're living in a different era. Today, more than ever, we need creativity, critical thinking skills to imagine a new reality. Universal basic income is a bold recommendation that can reimagine the new American reality. This will pave the way for all of us and provide us a solid foundation for us to earn, learn, care, hope, and pave the way for pursuit. Ladies and gentlemen, universal basic income is basic income which will offer a better outcome. This is our chance to give every American the ability to take meaning back into their lives and reimagine themselves in a new American reality.
This is the time to make our basic needs our fundamental rights. Today, we have a national document called the Bill of Rights. It includes 10 amendments that were written by James Madison. These amendments note some of our liberties. For example, one of them is freedom of speech, and also our right to plead the Fifth. However, none of these amendments protect our basic needs. And because of that, we are proposing Amendment 0. Amendment 0 will grant the right of the people to have their basic needs met with an income that denies poverty. It is 0 because we need our basic rights, our basic needs protected before we can enjoy any other one of our liberties. It is 0 because it is our new foundation. It is 0 because it is what our founding fathers envisioned. And it is 0 because no one can pursue their happiness until we are all above the poverty line. We, as a group, took this much more than a thesis project. We thought Amendment 0 needed to exist in the world, and because of that, we decided to put a White House petition online. So currently, right now, it is live up on the website to promote Amendment 0. And we hope that today, you will help us make Amendment 0 an American reality. So please visit our website and sign the petition.